Hi, I'm Laura.
I'm Deanne.
Hi, I'm Philippe.
Welcome to our Lymond book club. We are reading Queen's Play by Dorothy Dunnett, and we are on part 4, chapters 4 and 5. There's only one more chapter in the book after this. Dee is going to lead us through a discussion of these chapters, but before we dive in, Dee and Philippe, what were your initial impressions of these chapters?
Would you like to start, Dee?
Sure. I really loved these chapters. I thought they were great. They were full of action and character things, and a lot happened, and a lot of it was really satisfying what happened to me. Except for the Robin part. I'm super sad. I'm so sad for him. But yeah, and the chapter 5 was just like, actiony, and it was good. So I liked it.
How about you, Philippe?
Yeah, I have to mirror that. I really enjoyed these chapters. I feel that Lymond kind of took the back seat in these two chapters, and O'LiamRoe became our real hero, which I really enjoyed. And also was at the edge of my seat because I thought on several occasions we might lose him. And I was like, no, please don't kill him. Not after all of this. Just the transformation that his character has gone through from the beginning of this book up to this point. And now he's becoming this man of action and seeing all of these things. We can discuss it all when we get to that. But I really enjoyed that part. And we're going to be inundated with Lymond for 4 more books, so I kind of liked him taking the back seat for just a little while O'LiamRoe came to the rescue. Yeah, and yes, I was sad for Robin too, and we'll get there.
So much
Yeah.
O'LiamRoe has, I think, it might be my favorite moment in the book so far.
Wait, which moment?
I'll tell you when we get there.
All right.
But there's just this little moment that I was just like, oh, that's so great. So yeah, I literally said something out loud while I was reading it because I just liked it so much. So yeah, I completely agree. O'LiamRoe does kind of become the hero for these 2 chapters, and it's just super fun to see.
It's also nice that at this late point in the book, there was still something that surprised me in the fact that Peter Dooley is sort of a betrayer, which I wasn't expecting.
Come into something. I knew that she couldn't keep mentioning this servant for the whole book and then for him not to be important in some way. So it's yeah. But yeah, I was the same. I was surprised that he just totally betrayed them. It's but yeah.
So I'll echo what you guys said. I love O'LiamRoe's transformation, and I love how she wove that theme throughout the whole book and sort of piece by piece showed you how it happened so that it is really, really satisfying and doesn't hit you out of nowhere. It was built up and built up. I will also say, yes, Lymond takes a backseat, but also these chapters have one of my favorite Lymond moments, which is when he reveals himself to the French court by playing this song so beautifully that they know that it has to be Thady Boy, and everyone is shaken by how amazing it is, even when they're condemning him because of it.
And I love that he just kind of is all right, damn it, and then just plays the gorgeous song knowing that it's going to be his downfall, but it's well, this is where we are.
Yep. And that he's so good, and the way that he taps into this human part of himself that he can't really express otherwise, and how all of these people who we've gotten to know through the book, and most of them we don't are all moved emotionally by it, and how Margaret Lennox is sinking her teeth into her lip. It's just such an intense scene, and he's shaking afterward. I just love that.
And I like how he takes this moment where clearly D'Aubigny has a win because he sort of manufactured this reveal to come about, and he just makes it his own. And he's like, yes, you got me. I'm going to have to reveal that it's me. I could try and act like it's not, but that's not going to fool anybody. Right. So I'm going to do this the best possible way and diminish your win.
He just blows it out of the water.
Yeah.
And it's if it's going to happen, it's going to happen spectacularly. And
That's the next chapter when he blows it out of the water. But
Okay, let's look at this in order. So we start with a quote, which is not near as dark and horrible as previous chapters' quotes have been. We're not talking about raping women in this one, which is good. I'm not sure quite what this is the price of satire, Chateaubriand, the price of satire. And is payment for praise or satire commanded in the laws? If according to the law of the divine house, there is no command but for the praise of God alone, and heaven is its price. So
I took it to be something like you're supposed to be praising God, and so satire, which is like a form of art that's critical and isn't about praising God, is maybe not as approved or not approved of the way that praising God would be. And also the price of satire, I think, is a great title because it's the price that Lymond pays for his Thady Boy character and the way it, I guess, satirized the French court. I don't know if it really satirized them, but it certainly pushed their behavior.
yeah,
And
I guess satire can be seen as like a perversion of praise. Like it's praise but not meant to praise, like it's on the surface it's praise, but the subtext of satire is always criticism or critique. So maybe okay, so we start this chapter with O'LiamRoe finding out about Una and Lymond. So, as we knew was going to happen, we're not surprised by this. Did you he gets what in my part of the country we would call knee walking drunk, but he passes out at the bar, and so then we have Peter kind of takes over for this messenger comes to get him. And what do you guys think about this whole bit between Peter and we have a little confrontation between Lymond and O'LiamRoe, if you want to kind of
I just did want to say, I don't think it's only that he learned about the sort of the affair that really upset O'LiamRoe. I think part of it is also that he learns that it was for nothing because Lymond didn't get anything out of her. So great, you went and did that and you didn't even get what you were looking for.
Yeah.
To me, the most interesting thing is when Peter meets with Robin and we see the degree to which Robin is just fantasizing about getting Lymond's approval and still kind of thinking of him as Thady Boy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean that's really what I got out of that scene too, is that I just had my sympathy for Robin is just going through the roof. I know it's because of the way that Dunnett is writing him. Is he actually a more sympathetic character? No, he's still done all the terrible things and I shouldn't have sympathy for him. But the way that she's writing these scenes with him after he gets to this little hut in the woods, and just the pathos that's coming out of these scenes. And so at the bottom of 420 where he says, and he's talking to Peter, he says, "And you must say," he said carefully, "that in giving this information, I trust Mr. Bella, Mr. Crawford." So he's clearly still thinking of him as Thady Boy. "To see I take no scathe and no blame for it at all. I shall need to give myself up, and before the explosion takes place, Mr. Crawford must come here, and with a proper guard and officer, and I will put myself in their hands. Otherwise, he does not need to be told. They'll shoot me on sight. I'll wait here at 9 tomorrow morning." And then it's just tell him I'll expect him then to share my bread. He won't be disappointed in my table. And he's just, it's just he's going to come and he's going to fix it. And I'm going to I'm gonna prepare this place for him, and he's gonna be proud of me. And you're like, oh.
It's that he's going to be proud of me, because the last conversation they had was when Lymond was pushing him and telling him, you have to be precise, you have to be, good, you have to be really good. And Robin has been so craving that kind of leadership, so he just desperately wants to live up to what Lymond told him to be, and he's working so hard and he's trying so hard.
Yeah, and then you see later in the scene where it shows him, like, his preparations are so careful. He makes this soldier space, it's so clean and so precise, and just like, oh, buddy.
Yeah, and he's got this fantasy in his mind that Lymond is going to sort of, take him away and be this leader, and like he'll spend the next couple years like learning from him and becoming a better man. And probably in Ramond's mind, he thinks that he can help make Lymond a better man as well. Unfortunately, I don't think that's the story that Dunnett is going to tell. So,
what story do you think Dunnett is going to tell?
This is jumping forward to that bit, that little bit of Robin we get in the next chapter, but I really think it's the last time we'll see Robin alive. I sort of predict that the disappointment that he's going to have because Lymond doesn't show up to like save him from this fantasy world that he's created and bring him into it, it's going to be too much for him. So
he's going to commit suicide.
I think so. Yeah. I think it's tropey, and it's where it seems to be leading. Like that little scene is just so sad, and like it's just the perfect setup for,
that's true,
something bad happening.
I could totally see you right. Like if he waits and waits and waits, and Lymond doesn't come and doesn't come and doesn't come.
Yeah.
And he just decides there's nothing left. And
yeah, because he did all this work. He spent all this time doing all the things Lymond charged him to do. And it's this moment, he's waiting for this approval from Lymond to come, and Lymond will come in and save him, and like it'll be his redemption. And we know that it doesn't happen because Lymond is busy saving the queen. So.
Right. He literally says, like, no, I'm not going to go to Robin. Like, there's a moment where he makes a choice, and he doesn't necessarily make the wrong choice. Like, he goes to save the queen. That's the right choice. But he's very dismissive of Robin when he makes that choice, and he's really, like, he's kind of mean in the way that he characterizes him in that moment. And yeah, I can see him like showing up to get Robin, and Robin being dead.
Yeah. I mean, there's a chance that
I hope there's another moment, but
we'll see. It's got to happen in the last chapter, because that's all we get of Robin. If it does happen, he could also just sort of disappear, or
if Robin is correct about people coming to get him and shooting him on sight.
Yeah.
Like, that he is arrested, killed in the arrest, and Lymond could have, if Lymond had gone with them, he could have saved him. But.
Yeah. And I think it'll just fulfill his sort of role as a tragic character in this book.
Yeah.
Because he really, he's done some awful stuff, but like, he's trying to be better.
Not going to make it to the end of the book, like, for sure. No. But yeah.
I'm actually not sure if he expects Lymond to save him and take him away, because he did try to kill the queen a few times. So I wonder if he just expects he'll be killed still, like arrested and killed, but that he'll have saved the queen and it'll be a less painful and a more redemptive death. I don't know.
Yeah, just a more honorable death. Yeah. Or that he'll be executed as opposed to tortured and then executed, which would be.
I just see him thirsting for this like need to be taught, and his need to have a leader that like actually gets him to become a better man. So that's why I'm sort of leaning towards that. But
yeah. Or maybe he doesn't know which way it'll go, but
he wants to impress Thady Boy.
Clearly.
Yeah, and the way his brain just keeps going, like Thady, Lymond, Mr. Ballot, Mr. Crawford.
Yeah. So then we find out that Peter Julie has decided to take upon himself to destroy the message from Robin and not tell O'LiamRoe, because he wants O'LiamRoe to just go home. And he's like, tomorrow the little queen will be dead. That's the only reason O'LiamRoe's staying in this damn country. So the little queen will die, and then we will go home. And so it just gives you a sense that, like, he thinks that he knows O'LiamRoe so well, but he doesn't know him at all, that he thinks that that's an acceptable choice. So, or at least maybe he knows him well, but he doesn't care about his priorities, which sucks. So.
Yep. And he can't stand Robin, and he can't stand Lymond either.
Right.
I found this whole message thing had interesting parallels to Romeo and Juliet. How Juliet's message never reaches Romeo because of fate intervening, whereas in this way it's Peter Julie intervening. But like, it totally reminded me of that moment. Like, if that message had reached him, things may have happened differently. I mean, things happen for the best anyway. The message is eventually discovered and the queen is saved, but it didn't have to be so dramatic.
You know, it's probably also one more example of Lymond's kind of callousness toward people that are quote unquote below him, because we saw him being callous toward Peter earlier when there was some game that he like traded him away for 10 days. So maybe if he had been kinder to Peter, Peter would have been on his side in this situation later.
Okay, speaking of Romeo and Juliet connections, this is a little off topic, but when was Shakespeare's earliest play put on?
Do you expect any of us to know this offhand?
I don't know it offhand. I really should, but
1580s?
Probably the 1580s.
Like 1570s, 1580s, something like that. I would say 1580s maybe. So I'm wondering.
Yes.
Yeah, 1580s. So I'm wondering if we're ever going to have, like, is Lymond ever going to go to a play? Like, conceivably, if he lives long enough. Like, it sounds super cheesy. I'm kind of curious about that.
Maybe Lymond will be in a play.
Yeah, like, I mean, he would be in his 50s, you know? Like, that's a reasonable assumption that he would live that long if he doesn't get stabbed in the back by somebody.
Introducing Sir Francis Crawford of Lymond as Hamlet.
Yeah, it would be, I don't know.
That's one of his.
I would be interested to see Dunnett write that scene. Like,
yeah.
It's probably super cheesy and I doubt you would do it, but it would be kind of fun to see that interaction. Okay, so then we get, one of the things that I thought was super interesting about these two chapters was that we get these interspersed bits of the French court that I absolutely did not care about. Like, especially in the next chapter. And this one right here is not too bad because it's got some interesting character stuff going on in it. But especially as we get into the bit by the lake, it's like ceremony, blah, blah, blah. What's going on with the lake? You know,
Yeah.
and then ceremony, blah, blah, blah. What's going on with the lake? Which I thought was such an interesting, like, vivid picture of, like, real life is happening out here, and inside this room where this ceremony is happening, like, nothing interesting is happening, and the people in the room aren't even interested in it. Everybody's super bored. It's really hot. Everyone's just like, we just want to get it over with. We have to go through all these ritual steps, and once we get through we have to do them. So there's this thing, and there's this other thing, and there's this other thing, and we have to put it on a cushion, and then it has to get presented. And it was just like, and you just see everyone's just like, oh, we have to do this again. Whereas outside, you've got this life and action, and things are happening, and people are making decisions that are actually having impact. So it's this interesting just combination of the French court was doing something completely useless and meaningless, and Lymond et al. Were making life-changing decisions.
Yeah. What exactly is the investiture? Like, what's the point of it? What were they trying to accomplish?
They were making someone someone a Knight of the Garter? Is that right? Is that what was happening? Somebody was being invested into some thing. Like, I thought it was a Knight of the Garter, but I'm not sure. I thought that was an English thing, and so I'm like,
I just wasn't sure why the ceremony was happening.
I didn't know.
It's I don't know all the details, but it was basically like France and England are making peace, and they're sort of pretending like maybe there's a chance at getting Mary Queen of Scots for Edward the King of England, but knowing that it's really going to be an engagement to one of the French princesses, Princess Elizabeth. So it's all a ritual around the peace process between England and France. Whatever the surface reason is, I don't care enough to remember.
Northumberland something. Like, Northumberland was becoming a thing of a thing. But I don't think it mattered. It doesn't matter to the story.
It doesn't matter. I'm Googling it, but whatever. There's not enough on here for me to research. But
completely germane to the plot, but I was just wondering.
Yeah. Okay.
I was just saying it was very ceremonial, and they had to do the ceremony.
Yeah.
What I find interesting and kind of is one of the things that gave me more confidence in Dunnett as an author, because at first I wasn't super confident in her because the words she uses and the way she writes is so weird that it was like, do I trust this writer to take me on this journey? But I love her her understanding of like realpolitik and her cynicism about all the sort of phoniness of the court and the stuff that they're doing as they're doing a certain thing on the surface, and they're claiming it means a certain thing, but what it really means underneath the surface is completely different. There's a line in here I quite enjoyed where it was like, the English were enjoying it rather more than they had thought. The technique was much the same as in England, though the monarch was older. Show respect for his toys. And the food was good.
I love that too. It's like, and the food was good. So,
so this is all this big ceremony about this really important blah, 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 but really like, the food's good, it's hot in here. Food's good. The monarch's a kid.
He's got snacks,
Yeah.
I like wine,
But it is just very, she definitely just has this understanding of how the world works, and she doesn't, like, it's another one of those things when you read history in a history book, especially if it's not a very good history book, is you get a whole lot of what they claimed things mean as if those are what it really meant. And of course, the much more interesting history is what's under the surface. What were the different push and pull, factions? What were people trying to get across by claiming that things meant certain things? Don't act like what they said it was actually is what it was, because that's never true.
Yeah.
I also love the way that she is able to, like, we get this sense of Margaret Lennox as this, competent foe of Lymond, and she gets the better of Lymond, and we sort of respect her as this antagonist and all of that. But at the same time, like, Dunnett is able to show us like how precarious her and Matthew's position is in the midst of all of this, and that she, like, Warwick is going to throw them under the bus if anything goes wrong with this whole visit to France. And I like that. Like, she's not this all-powerful, she's competent, but she's not like Voldemort, if you will. Like, she's not like super confident and competent in a way that we don't understand, or like has tons of power in like weird ways. It's like, no, she's moving in the midst of all of this precarious politics. And yeah, she's got a super high position and she's got a lot of power, more than Lymond, but it's still precarious. And Dunnett, I think, does a really good job of showing us that precariousness, which
yeah. I mean, go ahead.
I feel like it's the first time we've seen Margaret Lennox in a vulnerable position.
Yeah. Well, and just look at how many people got close to a throne in Europe at the time and then ended up with their head chopped off.
Yeah.
It's super true.
Yeah. And in the pretty recent past, the king was really fond of that. Like, Henry VIII executed people all the time. So, yeah. It was,
and put Margaret in the tower herself.
Yeah. I mean, so there is a bit of me that makes sense. I mean, we'll talk about when we get to the scene with her and Lymond, we can talk about this more, but she is a villain or an antagonist that makes sense to me. Like why she's the way she is embedded in her story. And yes, she's super selfish and she's looking out for her own benefit all the time. But you can see why. Like she's also come very close to a violent end, probably multiple times. And so like her behavior's understandable even if it's also reprehensible. So.
Well, and she's had to choose, or she has chosen to sacrifice people she cared about, or her lover supposedly, in order to save her own position. So having made that choice, once you make it, you're going to double down to protect yourself and be like, that was the right choice. I'm out for myself. Everyone's out for themselves. That's just how it is.
Right.
And Lymond is part of why she hates him so much, is he keeps putting her to shame and being like, no, there's more than that.
Yeah. You didn't have to make that decision. And
you're just a terrible person, Margaret.
Terrible. Okay, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. So we have this little bit with the French court and George Douglas, who is very interesting in these chapters.
Yes.
I do. George is. It's so interesting to see, like, which side of the line is he gonna fall on this time? You know, you just don't know. So, and then we get this bit where like the Dowager doesn't meet with Lymond, which I thought was an interesting little bit here, where it says. George Douglas, with whom the Lennoxes were staying, recognized the dilemma very well. We're just talking about this. Are they going to, denouncing D'Aubigny and all that, and got a good deal of entertainment from it. The circle of the Queen Dowager did not. Mary of Guise herself had no interview with Lymond in recent days, so much Margaret Erskine knew. Of what went on in her mistress's mind, she had no inkling. So I think it's interesting, in light of what's going to happen, that the Dowager Queen has not been meeting with Lymond and and I think that she knows that she's gonna betray him or thinks that's a possibility. So she doesn't want to meet with him. Like she doesn't want to talk to him. She doesn't want to, like, he's charming and wonderful and, and so let's just not talk to him. And then when we betray him in front of a whole bunch of people, it won't be so bad, but.
Yep.
So. Anyway, she, and also the Dowager Queen, like this little bit where she says, with the puppy-like magnetism of the toddler far behind, meaning her daughter, Mary's mother had found reborn no inconvenient torrent of warmth. So it's like she doesn't care for her daughter anymore. Now that she's not a cute little toddler running around, this particular version of Mary, she's like, she's
it's
sad.
It's hard to know how, like, it's hard to imagine, put yourself in those shoes, right? Every decision you make has to be political, in that kind of like, you're the Dowager Queen of a nation and stuff. And I don't know how much is her like kind of forcing herself to be that way, because that's how she has to be to make the kind of cold decision she needs to make, versus like how much she genuinely feels it. I don't know.
Yeah, but I think that's addressed with the word inconvenient. So it's like Mary's mother had found reborn no inconvenient torrent of warmth. So if she had warm feelings toward her daughter, those would be inconvenient because of her position. Like she would have had, because she has to put those political decisions first, caring deeply about this little girl would be inconvenient and a stumbling block. But she doesn't have it, so.
Well, there's an example of that in the paragraph before it, where she says, if the child dies, every hour I have spent on French soil has been a folly and every transaction a waste. Yeah. So she's worrying more about the political power that she's gaining over the life of her daughter, which I found rather to be cold-hearted.
Reprehensible. Like, yeah. And I understand she's political, and that's true, and she has powerful decisions to make, blah, blah, blah. But there's a part of me that wonders, like, and maybe this is more of an existential question, but like, why do you make those power plays? Like, what is it that she is gaining power for, if not for her family and for the, the continuation of their role of as power going forward? So if her daughter is not part of those decisions, what's the point? Like, why? And I know that that's not an answerable question, but it's kind of like for those people who have like the family dynasty concerns, like, it's always baffled me why the concept of a family dynasty takes precedent over the health and well-being of the children of that family. When it's like, that is the dynasty. Like,
well, maybe it's thinking that their health and well-being is all tied up with like power and wealth, and not realizing that it is also about, emotional health and happiness.
But this is such an extreme where it's like, if she dies, crap, I've done all this for nothing, so it's like, it's not even a concern about, like, it's not even her health and well-being in terms of like growing up to be a healthy and secure young woman. It's about like, does she grow up at all? Seems to not be a concern, other than it would be inconvenient for this power play. And
she'd have spent the past 10 years or whatever of her life in vain, 7 years, whatever, working for nothing. I mean, I think this is here in part. This is here because we've had from the beginning of this book Lymond refusing to unambiguously ally himself with her, and at first, looking at the way Game of Kings ended with the queen like being really kind to him and taking him to his mother. At first, when I read this, I was like, why is he so resistant? He supports Scotland. She's in power in Scotland. Like, why don't they ally? But I think this is where we're seeing why. And we see the same parallel with Cormac and Una, where if you ally yourself to someone who disappoints you and is out for themselves, not for the greater good, and then you're stuck with them, what do you do?
Or someone whose values don't align with your values. Like, even if they're like, at times the queen's intentions and Lymond's intentions were in parallel, but their values were never in parallel. If that's what, if this is revealing her values, then so at times he can walk alongside her, but at times he can't. And
that's why it's so important for him to preserve his own independence of thought and action.
Agreed.
His own integrity. Yeah.
His own integrity and his ability to be like, to not have a strings tied where he has to do what she says. So he can make a different choice. So also in this section I found entertaining is at this point we have O'LiamRoe where Dislike ran fuming against Lymond. So at the start of these chapters, he's still in his I can't stand Lymond mode. And by the end of these chapters, they're like partners and allies and getting along. And I just love this transformation too.
It's like the end of these two chapters is almost like a buddy cop movie, where they're like gonna go save the queen together.
Lymond and O'LiamRoe and an elephant.
It's so great.
And then their sidekicks are Archie and Michelle Harrison.
Yeah, and Huey.
Yeah.
It's true. It's true. So then we had this one quote where I was saying earlier that this is the quote that I figured out, because I was like, wait, I know what this one means. Where O'LiamRoe has come to, there's this like tournament jousting, fighting competition thing that they're all watching. And so O'LiamRoe has come to sit, and he has to pass George Douglas and Margaret Lennox. And George Douglas says this thing in French, but he starts it out with Samson. And so clearly, I don't understand the French, but clearly he's mocking O'LiamRoe because he shaved his beard. And it's referencing, when Samson's hair is cut, he loses all of his power and becomes weak. And so he's like, oh, O'LiamRoe somehow has become weak because of this. So I don't know what the French says, but it's got to be something like that. And Margaret laughs. And
I feel like they're also mocking him because it's become public knowledge that Una, he lost his wooing of Una, and that she's here with Cormac O'Connor. Oh, well, actually, that's part's not known, that they're a couple. But, like, especially in Margaret Lennox's eyes, she knows what happened last night already. Like, she knew it was happening when she saw them sort of disappear.
Yeah, they weren't very discreet. Lymond and Una.
No.
Almost like the court gossip is going around, and O'LiamRoe has become the butt of the joke.
Mm-hmm. Although he does, there's this little moment where he turns around and says, "There is a laughing time and a time for speech. I am in my hour for breathing only." She laughed again, but not with her eyes. So somehow that hit home a little bit.
Well, think about it this way. O'LiamRoe is jealous because he's jealous of Una. For Una. Margaret has the same feeling. She wants Lymond.
Mm-hmm.
So they're both jealous.
Yep. And there he is. His dislike ran fuming, like you said. So then we get introduced to these fights, this series of fights that are going to happen, and it's just Diabni trying to manipulate Lymond into revealing that he's Thady Boy. So the way that he chooses to do it this time is through his fighting skills, and how it's going to be so obvious that he uses the same wrestling skills as Thady Boy. So they set up John Perrott, who is one of Henry VIII's bastard children. And you get the sense that he's kind of built like Henry VIII. So he's a big guy, a big, strong guy. And he's going to sort of copy the Cornishman in that fight. But before we get there, George Douglas kind of tries to save Lymond.
Yep.
Yeah, very curious.
He's allied with France, with Scotland now, because the Queen Dowager gave him whatever for his son, Morton. Yeah. So he's helping out.
Yeah.
And
so it's like, okay, George.
And I'm sure he knows that it behooves him to have Lymond in his debt.
Yeah.
It'll pay off later.
Yep. And they sort of have a moment where they look at each other and so they do that fight, but then he can't get out of it. So he gets challenged again by John Perrott and Pernot. And so the question is he going to let this guy literally break him, like break his legs, or is he going to flip him and use the same technique that Thady Boy did with the Cornishman? So
this I have to say is one of my few times in Dunnett where I don't fully go along with her setup, because she flat out says there are not so many ways of solving a sudden problem of leverage. So there's not that many ways, there's not that many moves you can use. So the fact that he would use the same moves as Thady Boy doesn't prove that he's Thady Boy.
I was confused by that too. But I thought that maybe it wasn't so much that they were going to prove he was Thady Boy in front of everyone as that they were going to remind everyone of Thady Boy.
Yeah. I think that's what it is, just the act of having him in that situation that's reminiscent of the Cornishman, therefore reminds everyone like, Thady Boy, which is what happens. Like Lymond doesn't make a choice one way or the other, but everyone is already associating him with Thady Boy.
And it's like I think it's the physical, like because John Perrott was chosen because he looks like the Cornishman, and so the physical thing of them fighting is just like, oh, I've seen this before.
Yeah.
I think there's already enough sort of proof in the story to show that a lot of the French court is already suspecting, so that this would just be sort of the straw that broke the camel's back. And I shouldn't say that because I don't want any more animals to get hurt in this book.
Yeah, we had enough.
I know.
There's one moment in this fight that I really like, which is the moment where Lymond messes up. And it says, arrested for the second, whether in admiration for Lord Daubeny's inventiveness or in a kind of silent snort of hysteria at the prodigies expected of him, a condition O'LiamRoe recognized to which Lymond was all too prone, Francis Crawford was off guard for the one moment that mattered. And the fact that she uses the name Francis Crawford is telling us like he genuinely was off guard in the moment that mattered, and that's what puts him in a bad situation. And it's like his own hysteria at the prodigies expected of him. I don't know. I love that his sense of humor comes out in the wrong time in the wrong place, and also just the hysteria that throws him off guard, and the fact that he screws up. I like that he screws up.
Yeah. And then, again with Douglas, like he makes these dry comments where he's like, no shame to him, but a very great pity. Since he was at it, he might as well have broken Sir John Perrot's neck. So he's like, yeah, well, he's at it. He might have just killed the guy. Like, wouldn't have made a difference. So
that's the way he took care of the Cornishman, so why not do it again?
Exactly. And then we get these very foreboding repetitions of assurance of Mary's safety, which I think we're undercut a little bit by the fact that we know she's not going to die because we know the real Mary lived. But if we did not know that, I would have been super scared for this little girl, because it's like the end of this section says Mary was still safe, period, which had nothing to do with what had been going on in the last couple of pages. So it's like all of a sudden we get this out of the blue. By the way, Mary's still safe. And then 2 sentences later, they return to the chateau. Mary was still safe. It's like, oh man, Mary's not going to be safe for very much longer.
It's a good way of building up the tension, because it's like, okay, it's coming down to this moment. Like, he's really going to try and kill her now.
Yeah, no, it was an excellent bit of foreshadowing. I loved that repetition, like sentence, other sentence, repetition of the first sentence. You know, like it was just this really nice, pay attention to this, without being over the top dramatic about it. Like it was just this nice repetition. Okay, so then Douglas is apparently super concerned for Lymond. Which again is like, okay. He's just like, Christ, get away, man. Feign sickness. He's like, you can get out of here. Come on. You're just like, George, what you doing? But then we get a little bit, it's interesting that George doesn't understand Lymond's motivations, which I think it's another commentary sort of on the Lennoxes and what they're, as a family, what they're, like Douglas. I keep thinking he's a Lennox. He is a Lennox. No,
he's a Douglas.
He's a Douglas.
Yeah.
There is a relation, but
no.
There's a relation by marriage, because Margaret Douglas is married to Lennox.
To Lennox, okay. So George so how is George related to Margaret again?
He's her uncle.
Her uncle, right. He's related to Margaret.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's an interesting commentary on that family, because he says, like, what do you hope for that you haven't got? What can that child give you? Meaning, why are you sticking, like, why don't you run? Like, what is this?
Why would you sacrifice yourself for her?
Right. Why would you continue to do this? And there was a little silence, and Lymond replies, a virgin audience for my riddles, I believe, said Lymond thoughtfully at length, but it certainly poses an ungallant question. Shall we join his grace? And just that his response to that question is, she's a little kid. Like that's, I mean, the virgin audience for his riddles, it's like, she's a little kid. And that is, it's not about, like his response about that, it's not about power, it's not about future reward, it's not even necessarily about the country, although it is all those things as well, like all those things are part of it. But the core of his answer is, she's a little kid.
Well, not only that, but she's a little child that he cares for.
Yeah, right. And like and it's just the connection that they have is this riddle thing that's come up several times, and just that she has expectations of him, like being there for her and like, give me another riddle, you know, and yeah.
I mean, and it's very typical that the Lennoxes or Douglases don't get that, because their whole thing is, you know, they don't seem to be sociopaths, but they seem to be intentionally putting that out of their mind. Like, yes, I feel emotions, but I turn my emotions off. I don't care about anyone. I can only care about myself, because that's just how the world is. Instead of have Lymond being there and being like, no, my emotion, like the care I have for this person has value in its own right, is just like beyond them.
Right.
But also, and also like this whole setup, this whole thing where he's like, I'm going to go and do this anyway, I'm going to reveal myself anyway, is definitely him, like very typical for Lymond, same thing he did in the last book when he kept trying to sacrifice himself for Christian, being like, all right, now I'm going to put myself on the line. And he's got like several threads he's set up, right? Robin could come through, Una could come through, Harrison could come through, O'LiamRoe could come through. Like there's all these different possibilities. And by putting himself in danger, he makes them all more likely to come forward because it's the only way to save him. And he takes himself off the board. So they're like, oh, he's not going to do it. if someone's going to do something, I better act. But he's also like putting himself in this immense amount of danger.
Yeah.
The fact that 3 of those 4 people that, could help him, he's pissed off at some point. Like
Lymond pisses everybody
the
off.
only one who sort of like hasn't been wronged by Lymond at some point.
Yeah. And Michelle, who's the only, is his bit of the evidence is not that strong. Mm-hmm. So it's like the people who are most likely to actually make a difference are people that he's super pissed off. So, yeah.
Again, typical Lymond. Like in the first book when Will Scott is the one that saved him. The last one you'd expect, considering how much he pissed off Will.
That's true. Lymond does not engender indifference. Like, by any means.
Strong emotions only, one way or the other.
Yeah. Okay, so then we get this scene where he reveals himself to the king and the court. And I mean, Laura, what were the points of this? Because you talked about you really loved this part. So what were the points of this scene that really spoke to you?
Sure. So we start with O'LiamRoe. He's watching and he wonders, since exposure had to come, if Lymond would not have preferred to stand on his scholarship, to reveal himself in argument with Pickering or Smith or Thomas, rather than as a tumbler, a clown, a singer. But I think that actually Lymond would have preferred to reveal himself as he does as a singer, because his whole Thady Boy persona is letting this aspect of himself out, which is powerful and beautiful, and like comes the closest to revealing the genuine soul underneath the emotions that he feels, because he's so closed off. He's almost never expressing his genuine emotions. Like the closest we got to him expressing openly what he was really feeling was in the Dell with Richard, but that was all like heartbreak and like negative emotions. And here we have him performing this music that touches the souls of everyone there who's listening. And it's like something O'LiamRoe says later, this was like the only time that whatever he calls him, was human. I think is super true. Like Thady Boy was this way of allowing Lymond to let down his very high walls and express what he was really feeling. I love the choice of the song that he performs, which is by Thomas Wyatt, about my lute, this is the last labor that thou and I shall waste, and ended is that we begun. So it's like, this is the last song I'm gonna sing, because sacrificing himself. And then I also love that the English, who are also there, the English embassage, are all they're watching, but they have no idea of the context that's going on that all the French court is experiencing, because the whole French court is like, oh my God, it's Thady Boy. And the English are like, wow, that guy who's a terrible wrestler is a great singer. No wonder the Queen Dowager keeps him around.
Yeah.
And they're all cheering and calling for more and thinking he's getting like congratulated by the king rather than condemned. Mm-hmm. And then there's just this beautiful moment where like O'LiamRoe is observing, thinking about how he'd wept before when Lymond performed the song drunk, and now Lymond is sober, and as sober he's even better, which kind of puts to lie this whole thing about like excess justifies art, because actually the excess ended up destroying the art, and here he is stone cold sober, playing this beautiful thing. And then I love the description of it. I don't know about you guys, I've had these moments seeing a performer, and especially like the one singer with a guitar kind of experience, and I just love the way that Dunnett describes it. She writes, each listener tightened as if called into tune. The double pull on sense and intellect was final, exposing the small places of self to universal challenges. And then there's these amazing reactions where the Queen Dowager of Scotland looked away. I think she's looking away because she's ashamed of the fact she's going to deny him.
That's what she's going to do. Yeah.
George Douglas, his brows raised, studied his knees. I don't know what he's thinking, but I think he is feeling something and probably some ambiguity. And of course, Margaret Lennox, her eyes.
Like George probably doesn't want to show his face because whatever he's feeling, so he looks down.
Yeah. And Margaret Lennox, her eyes wide on the singer, sunk her teeth in her lips. She is completely riveted, and she's so in lust and whatever degree of love she can feel with him, and she hates it so much that he has this power over her. And then the way that after he finishes, it goes silent. And it says, there was a vacant quiet into which all their bruised emotions pooled and ran, filling it splash by splash with exclamations and the stir of revived movement and the mounting dash and eddy of applause, which again, I've been in those moments where someone performs so beautifully that the whole audience is riveted and moved by it. And then that moment of silence and that like cathartic feeling afterward that everyone is feeling. I love the way that she describes it. And then we have Margaret Erskine, who's the one person in this book who gets closest to Lymond. And it says she's the closest to him, and she saw that he was shivering. Yeah. He waited until the fires of his own making left him. And then with a minimum of gesture, he rose, laid the lute neatly down, and walked across the soft dunes of tapestry. So this fires of his own making, this emotion that he genuinely allowed himself to feel to create this experience, is just the side of Lymond that we almost never get to see, and it's so precious here. And like it only Thady Boy was only in a mask was he able to let that part of himself out and let those walls down.
Yeah, there was a couple other things that I loved in this scene. One was the phrase that Lymond himself flung what he had made at John Stuart of Albany, and it just this idea that he is not passively accepting this trick that Albany has played on him. Like he knows exactly what it is, and he's actively like, the emotion of this is being flung at John Stuart. And then also, again, I just think I have a soft spot for Margaret Erskine, and this I love that it's only Margaret Erskine close to Lymond saw that he was shivering. And I think that there is something about Lymond that Margaret Erskine sees. And I think it's just because she pays attention. Like I think she, more than a lot of other people, pays attention to the people around her. And I think that's part of her background, with her mother being so ridiculous and the responsibilities that she's had young. But I really like her, and I think that part of what I like about her is that she is observant, and she gets frustrated with Lymond because he doesn't do what she wants, and he doesn't do the things that like she thinks are appropriate in the moment or that she thinks would be the best choice. But I think she also sees him, which is interesting for a character that uses so much deception, like that someone does see them. So I like that. And the fact that she is not like, she's not written as someone who's like overawed or attracted to Lymond.
Yeah, one of the very few.
Yeah, and I like that a lot. It's like, and he kind of knows it, and so and it's just like she's kind of not having it, but she also I think has a soft spot for him as well, which I like. So yeah. Okay, so then they figure out that he is Thady Boy, and they basically like pull him out of this room, lock him up in a very I think the implication is that he's getting beaten and tortured and put like trussed up tightly and all of that. And you get a little bit of Pater, who's just like doesn't care at all. Like he's happy.
Yeah. Good. We can get ourselves out of this situation that you've become embroiled in. Like, he's in prison. Let's go. We're done. It's like, and you specifically, O'LiamRoe, could be in trouble for this, knowing full well that he was your olive for a while. You were the master. So, like, let's get out of Dodge before things get bad for both of us.
Peter doesn't know the degree to which O'LiamRoe has changed, which we're all about to find out.
Yeah.
So I also really love, I don't know, I'm jumping ahead too much. I just love the O'LiamRoe point of view that we go into in the next scene, where we see O'LiamRoe's, we see his naivete and his kind of innocence about what is going to happen. He's got this, like, we can go in and, like, Thady and I, Lymond and I will, you know, laugh amongst ourselves and we'll talk them out of it and we'll explain, and it's, you know, whatever, screw them, it's gonna be fine. And then he comes face to face with, like, the angry king and the fact that this is super serious business and they're not going to joke their way out of it, and they're going to be lucky to live. He's going to be lucky to live. Lymond doesn't have a chance. And there's this great line where O'LiamRoe saw foolishly that there are circumstances under which it is a little hard to sparkle with provocative wit.
Yeah.
So I just think this whole thing is this kind of his transformation started already, but this really pushes it into high gear when he finds himself in a very serious situation where someone's life is on the line, and he knows that it's unjust, and he knows that only he could maybe take action to help. And also, I think, like, I love the way that his opinion of Lymond starts to change, and, like, I don't think we see exactly when, but as he goes through this, like, having experienced the music and then seeing Lymond here, who's, you know, kind of like roughed up and in this terrible danger, and allows the Queen Dowager to repudiate him and doesn't, you know, argue or reveal her. Like, O'LiamRoe starts to realize, I think, that this whole time it's actually been really serious, and that Lymond has been in existential danger the whole time, and that it wasn't just a joke playing Thady Boy, but, like, there was this whole time this risk of him being caught out as a spy and the risk of the child's death, and, like, it's all really serious business.
Yeah. So the Queen comes in and very dramatically repudiates Lymond. And does this whole thing about the Crawfords and their family. And I really wondered, like, there's this point where that, like, Richard and his family, like, D'Aubigny says, if his Irish disguise was simply a discourteous and foolish masquerade, said Lord D'Aubigny, his voice a shade high, why did Lord Coulter, his brother of that brave and so serviceable family, refrain from halting these excesses, or at least informing the Queen, his mistress, of Mr. Bella's real name? So then the Queen, Catherine, says, like, the family appears less reliable than you thought. And I just was imagining, like, Lymond hearing this, that his family is now suspect, and that there's this, like, now his brother is being drawn into it, and, like, that just must be his nightmare, you know, that they're being pulled into this disaster. That,
I mean, hopefully they'll be okay, because the French don't have that much power over Scotland, and of course the Queen Dowager knows that Richard is loyal, but it's certainly not good to have doubt cast upon his family.
Yeah. So and then Margaret kind of saves O'LiamRoe, which,
yeah, because O'LiamRoe's got such a good heart, and he wants to jump in and defend Lymond.
And Margaret's just like, no, you can't, and he doesn't want you to. And I love that her argument for O'LiamRoe is like, no, you can't. He doesn't want you to, and you got to, like, you're the one who needs to get him free. Like, if you get caught up in this, then no one will be able to do the things to help.
Right.
And that's the argument that convinces him, which
There's a couple of bits in here about Lymond that I like. One of them is, even dusty and uncombed, he contrived to look acidly collected. He gazed at Mary de Guise through half-shut, lazy lids and said, and I just love like the way she uses the word he contrived, because you know he's acting, but he's also really good at it. He's obviously not cool and collected, but he's pretending to be. And then also there's this moment where she makes this comment about, if you'd come as Francis Crawford, you might have done your country honor. And he says, but Francis Crawford was not invited.
Yeah.
Which is like partly acting, but partly the truth coming out. He is bitter about being the second son, not being invited, not being wanted for his mind, only being wanted as like a hired hand.
Yeah. She didn't want him to come, and and that's the crux of it, right? With Mary de Guise, is that she didn't want Francis Crawford to come and be here as Francis Crawford. She wanted the spy and all of that. And so,
or she wanted him to come as himself, but only if he was going to be completely loyal to her. So
yeah, that's true. Yeah. But
I also I like how Lymond makes such a point of protecting O'LiamRoe. Like obviously he needs to for the plot to work, for O'LiamRoe to go help, but he also I think genuinely wants to make sure that they're keeping O'LiamRoe safe. And I think he has some genuine honesty when he tells to them about O'LiamRoe, you did not know what a jewel you had, a man who wanted nothing from you but fuel for his wit. Phelim is welcome, you should have said. I think there is some genuineness in this, like, you had this great guy, because we always knew the whole time that he actually likes O'LiamRoe.
Yeah. Well, that's such a great, I mean, just the description above that, where he's like, he despises the diplomacy, laughs at statesmanship, pokes fun at pretension, ridicules wealth. Like, yes, that's him. Like, he's this smart guy who doesn't care about any of these political things, and he just wants like his home to be safe and his crops to be healthy and his people to be okay, and he doesn't want to get drawn into any wars or any power plays or anything that's going to bring soldiers to his part of Ireland, and getting involved in all of this stuff is just dangerous, and he's not wrong. Like, I mean, he's kind of wrong, but he's also not wrong.
Yeah. And we get more of this with O'LiamRoe in the next section, I think. The other side of that, like Lymond's frustration with O'LiamRoe is that he didn't act when he should act. But that changes.
Yeah.
It's also, I guess, one part of this is like, I don't know how much Lymond is being honest and how much he's acting throughout this whole sequence. Part of it, maybe he's putting on a show. Part of it, he's genuinely defending himself. I think in the next segment is when he has the sort of debate with O'LiamRoe about, excess and art. And I don't know how much of that is sincere and how much of that is he's trying to protect himself by sort of justifying what the French court did, because he knows that they're really punishing him not for these fake crimes he's accused of, but for the fact that he kind of took them along with him as Thady Boy.
He really did. Yeah, I love this bit too, where, because I think part of this conversation is revealing something to O'LiamRoe, and that part of what Lymond's doing is doing that as well, where it says, arguing against him, playing his part, O'LiamRoe heard his own philosophy in another man's mouth and found it lacking. And just that. So part of this is Lymond just continuing to talk to O'LiamRoe about his choices. Yep. And yeah.
Well, and he says again later, he hears his own worn out theories. So he this is sort of, like you said, Lymond kind of forces him to come face to face with himself and realize that he's grown beyond what he was at the beginning and what he believed at the beginning.
Yeah.
So Lymond's whole speech here, art cannot live without license and all that stuff. Do you think Lymond really believes that, or this whole thing, is he just putting on this performance of believing that to try to give the French an excuse to let him go and like forgive themselves for going along with him?
I mean, go ahead. What were you going to say?
I think it's not his full philosophy, but I think it's part of it. Like, I think he's arguing it a bit of it. I think he's playing it up a bit for the sake of the court, but I think part of it is true to him.
Yeah, I think there's a reality that as Thady Boy, he could be something that he couldn't be as Francis Crawford of Lymond. Like there was sort of, especially at the beginning of it, it turned into a disaster at the end. But at the beginning of it, there was like a delight in performance and tricking people and like playing this part of sort of a clown, but also an artist. And that freedom to engage with people in that way. And you know, part of it was probably that he was drunk some of the time and like he didn't have, you know, inhibitions in certain ways perhaps. But so there was a freedom in it that was in some ways also a trap. So I agree with Philippe, like yes and no. Like was he able to express himself without constraint in ways that he couldn't as him, like if he was being himself? Yes. Did that go well for him? No. You know, so like could he have done those things as himself? I mean, this performance he just gave was a beautiful performance that brought people to tears and overwhelmed the audience. And he wasn't drunk, he wasn't sober. I mean, he was sober and he was so. Does he let himself do those things if he's not playing a part?
Well, maybe he just needs to find a way to let that part of himself out without being wasted.
Yeah. And with being himself, like, because I think part of it wasn't just the alcohol, it's the fact that he put on a character. Mm-hmm. And the character that he put on was this kind of artist. So can he, as Francis Lymond, do the same thing? You know, I'm super curious what he was like before Margaret and slavery and all of that. Like, was this more a part of Francis Lymond? Like, did he play the lute a lot? You know, did he spontaneously perform for other people and bring this art into his world before all of the trauma happened? And I suspect that he did. Like, I suspect that's why he's really good at it, is because he did do it a lot as a young man. And that part of him has perhaps been lost through all of this. And so, I don't know, maybe he was able to gain it back a bit here. I don't know.
Why would he struggle to let that part of himself out without wearing a mask now?
I am not an artist, nor do I perform. But from what I've heard, it's super vulnerable. Like to put yourself out there in the performance like that is to make yourself vulnerable to the people that you're around. And so, and I've said this before, but I think like one of the biggest issues that Lymond has that I can see is that he desperately avoids being vulnerable around people. Emotionally, even more than physically. Like, he doesn't want to be physically vulnerable either, but it's the emotional vulnerability that I think he tries to protect himself from the most. And performing a great piece of art would be hard to do without being emotionally vulnerable in that performance. So
Yep. No, 100%. I agree with you.
Yeah. And I think when he was younger, it wasn't as much, like, it wasn't a risk. Like, if you haven't been hurt, then you don't know what can happen, you know? So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think we know that he was betrayed and traumatized, and so we therefore see his walls go up and his inability to let people in. And I think this is why O'Liamroe starts sympathizing with him, because he starts to see that, like, oh, there's this very feeling person underneath there who normally, under this like asshole veneer that I hate, actually, like, just it's still under there. It just doesn't, he can't let it out. So like that this was the sort of the only time in O'Liamroe's experience of him that he was able to let that part of himself out and that it was real. But yeah, that does definitely raise the question of what Lymond was like before all this trauma.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and then there's this wonderful little bit where O'Liamroe, after this interaction with Lymond, and Lymond very kindly, it says, basically says, "I'm doomed, but you are not." So go and get drunk. Since you cannot improve matters, at least allow me the fruits of my own husbanding. In other words, I brought this on myself. Go and get drunk. And it was said quite kindly. Phelim O'LiamRoe and his Olive stared at each other for a long moment, blue eyes meeting blue. Then the Prince of Barrow turned, and uncaring whom he buffeted, strode headlong from the room. And you can just see him like spinning around and just storming out of there, like knocking people aside sort of right and left as he leaves, and just angry that he can't help. Like he's helpless in this moment. And yeah.
She does an interesting thing where she puts O'Liamroe in the position that she often puts the reader in, where everyone else is against Lymond and you're the only one going, wait, but he had a good reason. And here O'Liamroe's in that position where he's the only one in the room who's like, but he was actually trying to save the queen. Yeah. And so now, of course, O'Liamroe is now motivated to go help him. As the reader always feels in those situations, like, oh, but he's really a good guy.
Yeah. And Peter Dooley had been caught unawares. He is not expecting O'Liamroe to do so.
O'Liamroe is not. It's like the very opposite of himself. I love this line where it says, Phelim O'Liamroe, artist in living, the very core and prototype of detachment. And this is, as he's saying, to the house of Cormac O'Connor. So he's doing the opposite of everything that he was in the beginning.
Yeah. And he's, and then we get another moment of foreboding where it says, the new day would soon, the first light of the new day would soon hint soon at the trees at Chateaubriand Park and breathe on the dark confines of its lake. And we're like, uh-oh. Somebody's gonna drown. So
yep.
Any other thoughts on chapter 4?
Just a couple. There's one bit right before this where Lymond is making his whole argument, and he says, feeling, Lymond was saying, ending his exposition on the inspiring properties of drink, debauchery, and general freedom from convention, feeling needs a respite from thought, and thought returns refreshed after. So you could sort of see that as a microcosm or macrocosm of what he went through, like having a respite from thought and returning refreshed. Yeah. But I think considering the amount of trauma he had to overcome to return, I am skeptical that he believes this anymore. And I think he's just making this argument to, as it says, kind of salve the French court and try to get them on his side. And then there's a little bit in the king's condemnation of him that I think is interesting, where he says, the king says about Lymond, this is perhaps a man who studies other men and himself in relation to other men, an amateur of modulated conduct, a man who traps mutations, freakish properties of the soul, and sets them in conflict, a keeper of menageries. So there's like, it's a weird speech, but there's a lot of interesting little bits in there. There's the image of the menagerie, which this book has been, like all these animals. And there's this idea of Lymond as a man who traps mutations, freakish properties of the soul, and sets them in conflict. So he's an actor who takes these strange qualities and combines them and sets them in conflict, like within himself, and creates this persona that, you know, is dangerous and it's mischief inspired by the devil. It puts the whole court at risk. It could bring down their society, is the implication, you know. But I like this idea
for one guy.
What?
He said that's a lot of power for one guy. He's gonna
Yeah.
bring down the society.
But I do like this idea that it's been throughout this book also that Lymond doesn't know who he is and he doesn't know who to be, and he's like trying on these different personas to figure it out. And I think the king does kind of hit on something there where he sees the degree to which Lymond is lacking a sort of solid foundation of self and is you know, experimenting.
I mean, we talked about it before where it's like after Game of Kings, he's a bit adrift, you know? He's had these years of with a, you know, the single goal of clearing his name and you know, doing this, all the stuff from Game of Kings. And then at the end, it's like, okay, who am I now? And he still hasn't figured that out yet, I don't think.
Yep. And I think like we see that core every time we see him, you know, giving his life to save the queen because she's a child that he cares about. We see the solidness in him, but I don't think he
doesn't see that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not enough to build your identity around either.
Right. Yeah.
That was it. My other thoughts.
Okay. All right. Chapter 5. Still at Chateaubriand. Proof without love or hatred. So, obviously, implication that we have to have proof of Diabni's like intentions and choices to before Lymond can be freed. So a test is not easy without proof. Proof of certain necessity may be demanded with the feign. Do we know what that is? Feign. What's the feign? Okay.
I don't know.
Without love or hatred. So, and then it gets this whole thing about Irish slaves, which I was like, what? What is the reason that there is more for them as foreign slaves than as Irish slaves? Is it that the Irish slave has greater hope of becoming free than the foreign slave has? And so it is proper, though there be more for him as a foreign slave than as an Irish slave. I'm like, okay.
Some ancient Irish military force. The thing.
Okay. So I guess if they're capturing slaves in battle, then the Irish slaves are the... I wasn't sure where we were going with this. Other than we have to have proof. So, which we get in this chapter.
Finally.
Okay. So we have this really fantastic scene with O'LiamRoe and Una and Cormac and Madame Boyle. And oh my gosh, I liked it so much.
I even love how it begins. It's like a return to like Inspector O'LiamRoe, like back when he was in the bookstore. He's like, you know what? I'm just gonna take the initiative, and even though they're not letting me in, I'm gonna get in anyway. So he has to at this point.
Yeah, he breaks into their house and sneaks into Cormac's bedroom.
Mm-hmm.
He sneaks into Cormac and he's like stepping over Cormac on the floor. Yeah.
Stepping over his buttocks, by the way.
Yeah, right.
I was like, oh, okay.
Right. And then like Una wakes up and her first thing is he dead? Which like, oh.
I think there's a couple of hints in here that she has fallen for Lymond.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit. But and then so he says he answers thinking that she means Cormac. He's like, no, he's right over there. He's before the fire, my dear, like a pricked pudding. if that is the he you mean. So he does actually know that she means Lymond. And she obliged him direct and stormy without a second thought, both palms flat on the bedclothes. You know who I mean. Why are you here? Is the queen killed then? Why has he sent you? So, okay.
So there's a couple bits in this section I liked. One is her bedroom, unperfumed, undecorated, scoured herbal smell of the schoolroom. So like, even though she's this beautiful woman, that's not her environment. It's like her beauty is just this like random side effect that she couldn't control, but her actual atmosphere is so dour and cold and unhappy. And the description of her drowned and veiled in the black weeds of her hair, another water metaphor with Una, because we always get these metaphors of her as a sea creature.
Mm-hmm.
And then O'LiamRoe saying, first of all, he calls her my love, and he says, no one but you and I can save that child now. Mm-hmm. So he's calling Lymond a child, and he's protective of him. So he's totally flipped at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And he's definitely pulling on, like, trying to appeal to her emotionally. Like, you are the only hope, you know, and we have to do it. And it's, yeah. Again, how old is Lymond? Like, what the hell? Because at first I thought he meant the child, meaning the queen. Like, you and I are the only ones who can save the queen. But yeah, if he's talking about Lymond, like, what?
I think he's talking about Lymond. The one he calls busy child throughout the book.
Mm-hmm. Right, the child. And then she's like, the child is nothing to me and will be as easy in the grave. So,
well, and then I think it also speaks to how old he is or not when she calls him an amateur, which I think is a very inappropriate word used to describe Lymond.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Which O'LiamRoe calls her out on. He was like, I would not use that word. That's not exactly what he says. I would not have said that thing.
Yeah. And O'LiamRoe, and startlingly, she flushed. She turns red when he says that. Mm-hmm. I think she's fallen for Lymond, and she knows that certain things he is not amateur in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because this woman is not one who flushes very often.
Yeah. And I love, and then O'LiamRoe, he's just so like forceful at this point. He's like, so the word you and your friend here are going to give me will damn John Stewart and save the girl and deliver our sweet Olive, as you call him, all at once. Neat a conclusion as ever I saw. So, and then she's like, well, when did Francis Crawford become the friend of your soul? And then his reply is, I rather fancy 'twas when it came to me that the black-roaring Irishman we had there was only half the actor in Francis Crawford. The rest was that unnatural animal being human for once. So
I think that's the word on Thady Boy, and O'LiamRoe gets it.
Yeah. Part of it is him acting, and part of it is him being real. Yeah. So yeah, so then he's just trying to convince her, and she's like, I won't, you know, I will not be touched. And she basically is like, she gets all this like, we're the fools, you know, we're the fools struggling, planning, begging at foolish doors, being sucked to the craven from all our sunken stock of force and eagerness and passion, while you court a strange brat and pair rhymes in Latin. Yeah.
There's a line here that I like. She says, whatever my body may be, my mind is my own. Mm-hmm. And it's a direct parallel with Lymond in the previous book, saying, I prize freedom of the mind above freedom of the body. Mm-hmm. So I like the parallels between the two of them. And I also think she's what's it called when you're like over defensive at this point. She's protesting a little bit much because she's on the verge. I think she really wants to help. And as we see, when she's forced to make a decision, she decides to help them. And she's actually been kind of secretly helping them throughout. But she still has, just like Lymond, she's got all these walls up and she's not actually letting him in at this point.
Yeah.
Just before what a mhuire is, Mhuire. It's a word that they use a lot, the Irish characters. I'm not sure if we've talked about that or not.
I will look it up. Keep talking while I do.
Sure. Sorry.
This we can talk a little about, like, Cormac wakes up.
His lady.
Oh.
Lady.
His lady. Amur, his lady.
Oh, so it's Amur instead of just. I was just thinking it was A. Never mind.
I guess it would be like my lady.
All right.
In that case. Or maybe it's an expression. Maybe it's a phrase.
Could be.
All right. Yeah.
Anyway, keep going.
So Cormac wakes up and he is horrible. Like,
I was gonna say also, I think the reason Una's being so mean to O'LiamRoe, she's trying to get him away to protect him from Cormac.
Right. Because Cormac is gonna wake up. Like, he's not gonna sleep through all this. And when he wakes up, he's gonna kill the person in the room with. I mean, she knows that, which is what happened. Yeah. And so Cormac wakes up and he's just horrible. I mean, he's basically like pimping out Una to O'LiamRoe, like, in the moment. It's so gross. It's so gross. This talking about her like she's food, you know, like, you had none of the cream and all this. It's so gross. And obviously, like, we know that he's done that before. That he's used her body and her looks to get people on his side and all that. And
we see the bruises on her. There's also she was made small and white, like the green-eyed Moro Lymond had called her. Moro, spelled slightly differently, is a sort of mermaid or sea nymph in Irish mythology, which is human on top and fish below, and can fall in love with a human but will inevitably return to the sea, which is very Una. And then he makes that phrase, or must you wait for a unicorn, which is referring to Lymond, the unicorn of Scotland. So like making a joke about pimping her out to Lymond in addition to O'LiamRoe.
And this whole, like, he's talking about this, and it says, and looking from O'LiamRoe's witless face to the stony one of the woman, he exploded into mirth. So, like, neither O'LiamRoe or Una is, I mean, they're clearly visibly unhappy with how he's portraying her. And he, like, exposed her body, and then so she did not even move. She did not move even when he did these things. And he sinks into the chair, made that comment about the unicorn, and gave Una a wink before returning to O'LiamRoe. And then he mocks O'LiamRoe with, like, Una told me you weren't a rival. But then you gotta love O'LiamRoe. Like, he responds calmly. So, like, all this is clearly pissing him off, but he says, "Faith, you're a modest man," said Phelim calmly. So then he, do you fancy that your fists will preach better than the honeyed tongue in your head? We are two reasonable men, and if you have the right of it, I just ask to be convinced. And so he's just like, what is wrong with you? Just tell me what your side is. Like, maybe I'll agree with you. Like, there's no need for all of this. And but of course, Cormac isn't smart enough to give it. Like, the implication is that Cormac can't convince him because he's not able to do that. Like, Una might be able to convince him, but Cormac can't.
Mm.
And yeah, so then he goes into this whole speech, and O'LiamRoe basically is just like, this is all the results that have happened in history. And he just goes through this recitation of like, here's all these, this person, like, Desmond tried to bring in the French 30 years ago, poor silly Ireland, to make war on Henry VIII. And Kildare himself boasted that, blah, blah, it just goes on. The Earl of Kildare is dead, his family attainted. His heir, a child with an Italian accent, living in Florence these 10 years. Just like, this is all ended in disaster.
Yeah.
And then Cormac says, "'Tis a throne for jailed of Kildare that I and the woman here are after making." So that's that's what they're trying to do.
I think that whole speech that O'LiamRoe gives right before that is where we get this idea of him, or where he got the idea of like sitting back and not getting involved is better than getting involved, because look at all the people that get involved in stupid ways and just make things worse and hurt themselves and hurt others.
Led to disaster and led to people dying and getting exiled, and it makes the whole situation in Ireland worse. So yeah. And then I love his thing too, where he says, "We're become a nation of uncles." And this idea that like there's no way, like everything is about getting someone else in power, like every plot, everything is about who are the children that, like, the nephews that we can like
that the powerful men can control. Yeah. There's a wonderful line right after that: "All Europe is a cradle of naked emperors lulled by a jackboot."
Yeah. Warwick and Somerset in England, Arnan and De Guise in Scotland, the last of the, it's like these are all the people who really have the power, and all these children are just
pawns.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
then I love the way O'LiamRoe ends it. "Can you not rest and let the corn hear itself grow?"
Yeah. Which is this thing, like, why don't we just be quiet? Like, why do we have to like just go home and plant a crop and like let it be there? But
well, and so I really love his whole speech here, because it's like super progressive. It's like, stop fighting for power for yourself, stop fighting in ways that are only going to hurt people, stop and look at the people and what the people need. And what the people need isn't a whole bunch of battles and a whole bunch of power struggles that are just going to destroy the land and get more people killed. What the people need is a society that supports them, crops that grow, learning and teaching and like developing. And it's a thing about making old men as well as laws and medicines and poems, right? So like old men in good, decent houses, just like, the equivalent of like Social Security, take care of people, help people.
Just that there's no, like, I love that bit also where it's like, our royal tradition is broken. There's no living vein of divinity with us. There's no heritage but one of wind-seated vivacity, and it's just like, there's no point to any of this.
Right. And then there's a couple of really great lines he has in here about the past. He says what Cormac is doing is living the past and murdering the future.
Yeah, I underline that too. Yeah.
And he also says, he talks about rejecting the laws that were 11 centuries old. And he says, were I 11 centuries old, I'd follow them. And I think that's why we've had these quotes from ancient Irish laws that were so offensive and horrible, so that we understand what he's rejecting. Like, rape is bad.
Right.
Just because this used to be the law doesn't mean that we need to follow it anymore.
Yeah, I mean, this live in the past and murder the future, which, not to get too political here on our Dorothy Dunnett podcast, but it felt so timely of just like this, what you're doing is trying to bring back a past that never existed. Like this idealized version of the past, which was never a real thing. And if it was good, it was only good for a very small number of people, and everybody else was miserable. And you're sacrificing the potential good that we could have as a community in the future, and you're sacrificing it to try to bring back this false idealized past, which I feel is the total narrative of American politics over the last.
And he even talks about tolerance. He talks about making fellowship with their neighbors, whether Celt or Irish Norman or Irish English, whether in the seaports or in the Pale. Like, let's band together. Let's make a society that helps and takes care of its people, that grows things, and gets get along with each other and make lives better, instead of just trying to live in the past and fight and kill and destroy.
Because the more they fight and kill each other, the easier it's going to be for the English or the French to come across and just take over completely.
Exactly. It's not even in their strategic favor. It just makes them weaker.
Yeah. And yet there's this moment which was both like a moment of change and growth for O'LiamRoe, but also I think sad. I think it was also sad, where Cormac says, O'LiamRoe says, "I am opposing you. In the name of God, with what?" said Cormac O'Connor, and turned to Una and barked. So he laughs at O'LiamRoe. "With force," said O'LiamRoe mildly. "I've sent word to the sleep bloom today. Do you land with your French or without? You will get such a blow, you will never need another." Nobody laughed. And so, like, he's chosen to act, and he's grown. This thing that Lymond has been wanting to do the whole book, and Una has also been pushing him to do. He's done it. But at the same time, it's sad because there's an element of him giving up this ideal that, like, you can't, like that you can live your life as a scholar and a farmer and like all that. You don't have to resort to violence. But
Well, I think there's a couple interesting bits in this. One of them is there's a hint that he's made this choice to act, and he too could fall. He too could make bad decisions. He too could end up hurting people. Like, by acting, you take that risk. But also the in the bit right after that, he talks about good talk has its roots in the earth. Like a turnip, it thrusts its feet in the soil and its head in the clear air. Blah, blah. "I, a miscast rambling thing, am ready to plow up this field." So the idea that talking and learning and thinking is good and important, and that's why he has a much better philosophy than Cormac has. But that thinking and that coming up with that philosophy and knowing his history so well the way that he does, none of that adds any value if he doesn't also act on it. Just sitting back and observing isn't going to change anything. So he has to find a way to engage with the world in a way that can make it better and not fall into the traps of people like Cormac who act in ways that make it worse. And the other part of this that's interesting is that I keep saying every character in this is a parallel with Lymond and his need to figure out what he's going to do with his life. And I feel like there's a very clear one where Lymond too is trying to figure out how he can act in the world and make a difference without compromising, without losing the artistic side of himself, and without allying himself with someone bad who's going to make dangerous decisions that are hurtful, don't align with his beliefs and ethics, and how he can put himself in a position like O'LiamRoe's now, and where you have to act and make choices, and you're never going to always be right. You're going to do things that hurt others, and you're going to have to figure out how to live with that.
Yeah. And yeah. So O'LiamRoe is now in danger of being killed by Cormac. And he says it doesn't matter, because even if they kill him, his heir is going to continue this. Like, it doesn't matter what they do to him. He has set foot on this path, and his heir will continue. So, but Una tries to be like, "Get away, he's going to kill you." And he's like, she says, "Francis Crawford depends on you," and he's like, "No, he depends on you." So,
well, this is interesting, right? It's not only O'LiamRoe being forced to take a stand, it's Una being forced to take a stand.
Yeah. So, like, will you move now? And then Cormac is he's so awful, and So then he pulls out his sword and starts to threaten O'LiamRoe. And Mistress Boyle is like, kill them both.
Yeah.
So she's so
Just as awful, if not worse.
yeah.
Oh, niece she's talking about, right?
Yeah.
What?
And
It is her niece. It's her own flesh and blood she's talking about. She's like, get rid of her. We don't need her anymore.
yeah. And then we had this lovely moment from Una where I feel like it's really what I was asking, like I was hoping that she would do in the previous chapters. You know, it's like I wanted her to stand up, like not to be saved by O'LiamRoe or Lymond, but to stand up on her own. And so it says, Una had been leaning a little against the Prince of Barrow, her black hair caught in his shirt, the soft robe brushing his feet. At that, she flung up her arm and then, collecting herself, moved a step forward and faced the great black bull shape of O'Connor, her pride, her king, and her lover. Leave troubling, Cormac. Let him go. Her voice was sane and quiet. The stab of the sword cut across it like a battle cry as Cormac raised the blade high and true and drove it at William's heart through hers. And just that moment where she like stood up and faced him and said, stop. And yeah, I think it was a turning point for her.
Mm-hmm. I personally really love Una because this has got to be super hard, and this is her whole life that is falling apart, and we know how proud she is and how hard this is for her, but she does care.
Yeah. I really liked her in this scene. Like she was great.
And I continue to just think she has the same issues that we find so sympathetic in Lymond, but because she's not a central character the way he is, we're not put in a position to have the degree of sympathy with her that we have with him. But if you actually look at it objectively, there's so many things that are his damage that's also her damage that we're sympathetic in him, and it makes me sympathetic to her.
There was one thing that we didn't really talk about it last time we were talking about Una, but there was a line that said something about how she was his father's before she was his. Like there was some sort of implication that she was his father's lover and then became his lover, which brings up the whole like super just horrible age issues that we see with Lymond and Margaret, and the fact that like she must have been raped by this horrible old man like when she was pretty young, and then sort of passed to his son as like a piece of property. Like, ugh.
I mean, this is why I think she makes some terrible choices throughout this book, but she was like, you know, taken into this situation when she was so young, and this has been her life for so long that it's really hard for her to see outside of it and to have a sense of self beyond it. And like in the YouTube comments, we've been sort of discussing like, why would a woman who's so intelligent allow herself to be taken advantage of like this? But she's almost like brainwashed in a way.
Yeah.
It's really, really hard. Yeah. And when you're in an abusive situation.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, I agree completely. Like, but we see it happen all the time. Like super smart women who are in situations where it's like, if you just take a step to the left and like, look at what's happening to you, you would see the trap that you're caught in, but you can't see something when you're in the middle of it so often.
Right.
And she spends all her time with Teresa Boyle and Cormac, so her ability to have like an outside point of view to see how messed up the situation she's in it's not there. She doesn't have anyone to bounce any ideas off of and to give her honest feedback on the situation she's in.
Right. Especially if she's been in it since she was a kid, which it seems like she has been. It's where's she going to get the perspective from? You know? Yeah.
I will also just note that she says, this is Frances's doing. She's on a first name basis.
I didn't catch that.
Yeah. So then we have this fight. It's kind of funny in some ways. Like it's super stumbly and like.
Well, they're in such close quarters.
Super close quarters. Like Cormac can't use his sword very well because it's like it's a big sword and they're in this tiny room and so it keeps getting like stuck in the furniture and
It's probably one of the few things that saves his life, and the timely intervention of Una a couple times as well.
He's not a fighter.
And
like
the fact
they
that
said multiple times, like he's not trained in this, and
like Teresa Boyle trying to interject herself, which doesn't end well for her at all, also is very fortuitous for OLiamRoe.
It's getting Teresa Boyle getting stabbed in the neck with a glass bottle.
Mm-hmm.
It's really funny. I mean, it's not funny, it's horrible, but it had not occurred to me that she dies the same way Lewis dies, with her throat cut, until we did the video, and Philippe, you were commenting afterward, and you were like, I thought at first that it was Teresa Boyle whose throat was cut, and I was like, oh my God, Dunnett did that on purpose.
Yeah, I did make that comment.
It's true.
If only I had known.
But it's poetic justice, man. She deserved it.
Yeah, she's rotten to the core. So.
Oh, she's so horrible. She's so horrible. Yeah, it was totally justice. I love the fact that she got stabbed with a broken bottle. Ugh. But this was the moment, by the way, this next moment on 452 is the one that I absolutely loved, and it's this. So it talks about how OLiamRoe is unarmed. He's got this unarmed body, and then his hands moved. It was only a small sling, and the stone was small too, round and silvery and warm from his pocket. But slinging was an ancient art, a lost custom, a piece of erudite and unnecessary knowledge which only OLiamRoe would have bothered to gain, and an art which only OLiamRoe would have thought it worth practicing. With the soft, craftless fingers, which right hand or left could split a held hair, the Prince of Barrow fitted his little stone, lifted the sling, and let fly. And I literally, when I read that, stopped reading and went, David! And it was like, it's just this wonderful reference of David and Goliath that was just so perfect. And because, you know, in that story, Goliath is overwhelming and completely assumed to win and is like this hulking, huge guy. And David is like this not powerful, not trained fighter, small, you know, like intellectual artist character, and yet he has this one skill that he's practiced over and over and over because he protects the sheep, and so he has this skill with a slingshot, and it's just so perfect. Like OLiamRoe is fighting Goliath, and he's going to win, and Goliath is going to fall, and I totally loved it. It's just, yeah.
I love it, and I love that Una saves OLiamRoe too, because she jumps on Cormac right before that, which is what gives OLiamRoe time to pull out the sling.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't want to be negative in the moment because it's a great moment, but I wish the slingshot had been set up at some point earlier, like so that we had some, you know, set up ahead of time. It just comes like out of nowhere, like, wait, he's got a slingshot.
Yeah. Right. I mean, like, it makes sense in that it's like this esoteric skill that he just probably practiced because it's like, I mean, most likely he practiced it because of the story and like, you know, what can that happen? And the reality is that like a stone flung from a slingshot can like shatter a human head, like super, super powerful. And so I can see him like, this is this weird skill that I'm just going to practice on my own kind of thing. But I agree. It would have been nice to have seen it at some point earlier in the story.
Yeah. Like OLiamRoe packed his slingshot, you know, I don't know.
Yeah, right. or just him like playing around with Loudus or something and like knocking, I don't know, fruit off of a
tree or whatever, yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, whatever. It's a very minor quibble.
Yeah. I did love the reference in the middle of the fight. I was just like, oh, that's so fun.
There was a bit right before that. I like just a line where right before Teresa Boyle dies, like the gray shears of Atropos, grim among the late flowers in Jean Ango's garden, the needle edge dropped. And that's where she gets her throat cut. And it's a call back to the very beginning, Lymond's entry into the book, where he climbs the statue of the Fates, which actually he climbed, I think, Clotho, not Atropos, but whatever. There's three of them. But I like that callback to the idea of the power of the Fates, and he's looking out for the scissors, and like this is like the scissors snapping and taking Teresa Boyle.
Mm-hmm. Yep. This Yeah, the scissors definitely snap her thread. Yeah, okay. Hi.
Oh, and then just going back to what we were saying before, where it's like it's exactly what you were saying about it's kind of sad that O'LiamRoe is in this position now. It's at the top of 453 where he says, he has won two in his way. It is a triumph of violence over culture, force over thought. I have come to the crossroads you feared and passed them. It may be a true road, or it may be the first step into all the kind, easy turnings of decay. So he's not out of the woods. He's taken his first step into acting in the world to make a difference, but it doesn't mean that he's going to be an unambiguous force for good.
And it's a loss of his idealism. Like it's a loss of this idea that culture and thought and all that will prevail without some sort of force and violence. And he's come to the realization that no, you do actually have to back this up with some sort of force. And so I'm gonna have to make, there's gonna have to be some battles of some sort, most likely. And that's a loss of his, even if it was an unrealistic idealism, like it was never gonna work. But it's still kind of sad that he has to lose it.
Mm.
And it's you can't be innocent anymore. It's a loss of his innocence too. You're gonna have to act on the world and make hard choices. And
exactly. So then Una says, he's like, or O'LiamRoe's like, I'm not going to leave. She's like, go away, go, leave. And he's like, I'm not going to leave you with them. And she says, it's time to go. I must take my road too. From this out, you will hear nothing of me and will do nothing to search me out. That is my price. So she's going to help him. She's going to tell him what he wants to know, but she's like, you can't follow me. I'm going to disappear and you will know nothing of me. And I am going to say that is not what is going to happen. I think at some point, perhaps she will disappear from this book. But I do not see her vanishing forever. Like, she's a super interesting character. and I actually probably feel stronger about the fact that I think she's going to come back more than I feel that like Philippe is going to come back. Because
really?
Well, the Philippe thing, I'm just stubborn because I had an idea. Like, I don't actually have any textual evidence for the fact that she's going to come back. I just want to be stubborn about my guess. But I do think there's more that Una has been a much more integral character, especially in the second half of this book. And I just feel like, barring death, like if she dies, obviously that's one thing, but I think barring that, I can see her popping up again at some point.
In what way?
Well, that's interesting because I think I don't know. Like, is she gonna come back and help Lymond? Is she gonna come back and be like an obstacle again? Is she gonna do what she did in this book, which is like ostensibly be an obstacle and not be very helpful, but actually sneakily help him a little bit? Like, I don't know. I think she's an enigma. Like, we don't know how she's gonna go. So
I'm wondering what she's going to do with Cormac now that he's sort of passed out in front of her. Like, is she going to take this opportunity to exact some sort of revenge? I know they're through, or at least she says that they're through, that she won't make that mistake and be back with him again. But like,
is she going to just vanish into the night? And
I think she needs to get the hell away from Cormac because he's going to go after her when he wakes up.
Like, I could see her just leaving, like now, like walking out and leaving. And
she can also ensure that he doesn't wake up. So
kill him first, yeah. But I mean, if she kills him here, and Teresa is also dead, then she's
true.
Like, she's on the run. But if she leaves him alive and Teresa's dead, she's not. Maybe she'll get blamed for Teresa's death, but maybe.
Well, and she's got the bruises to say, like, this man has been terrible to both of us. You know, he killed her, he beat me, so.
But nobody cares about that.
Yeah, I don't know how far that's going to go in the 16th century.
Yeah, no, I didn't think about that, unfortunately.
Yeah, he has the complete, like, if they were married, he definitely would have complete legal right to beat her however he might wanted to. And they're not married, but even still, like, nobody's gonna care.
So here's a question. Why do you think that she says her price is that O'LiamRoe never sees her again? Why not go off into the sunset with O'LiamRoe? Why does she push O'LiamRoe away?
I'm not sure if she feels worthy.
Yeah, I
His
think
presence. I think after everything has been said and done and all of her sort of plots and scheming has been laid out in the open, you know, she's like, how could you ever see me as a good person after all of this, you know?
a stronger take on it from like if we're gonna cast Una as like a stronger character, though, it could also be that she doesn't want to go from Cormac to O'LiamRoe. Like, she doesn't want to go from one man to another man. Like, if she's escaping Cormac in this moment, which we don't necessarily know that she is, but if she is, I know, please let that be what's happening. Then perhaps she's going to not be with anyone for a while. Which I think would be the best idea. Like, go be, even though O'LiamRoe would treat her wonderfully, and like, yes, I would like her to be with him for her sake. Like, I think it would be great for her if he was with her. But perhaps for his sake, I'm not sure she's the best one for him. Like, she's got a lot of damage, and yeah. So politically, she would probably be good for him, but I'm not sure if personally she would be very good for him.
Yeah. No, it's true. She's got a lot of damage. A couple comments also on their goodbye scene. One is he calls her Mocreeve again, which I'm not saying correctly, but it means my heart or my love in Gaelic.
Yeah.
Another one is she kind of reassures him when he's talking about, you know, this was his first step, but it could be the first step into like decay, like bad decisions. And she says, it will find nobler tasks yet to do. So she kind of reassures him that just because this night was violent, it's not like, that's not the rest of his action. His action isn't always going to be this kind of coarse violence. He's going to do better things. And then I just love the beauty of her goodbye, which is maybe a little purple prose, but I freaking love it. I think it's beautiful. When he asks if they'll meet again, and she says, at the fall of night on the far side of the north wind, love me. And he says, all my days, dear stranger, dear mate of my soul, all my days.
You know, I put a little heart. It was beautiful. I also thought, I love that she said that she'll be thinking of him. That she said, she says, leave me go kindly, my body will not want, and my thoughts you will have. You know, and it's just, she's basically saying, I'll be okay, and I'll be thinking of you. Yeah.
I still think she should have gone with him. And I think it is her low self-esteem that convinces her she's bad for him. And yes, she's super damaged and it's a risk, but she should have given it a shot.
Yeah, I think for her, it would have been a better decision to go with him. Like, yeah. Yeah. And they could have been and that's not say maybe it'll happen later. Like, maybe she'll show up again and she'll get to be like, he'll get to see her again and all that. And maybe, but they would make a great political couple, I think. Like, just from the sense of like, they kind of balance each other really well. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Fierce and you know, and he's real calm and yeah, they would make a nice, I feel like their strengths and weaknesses would balance each other really well.
Exactly.
But oh well.
Yeah. Such things are not meant to be.
Yeah. So now we go off on the hunt for Artis Cholet. Is that how we're saying it? I don't know. So
right.
he is the other henchman. I love that he's called a henchman. It's like, we have minions. And so
this book is the most James Bond, in my opinion. Absurd supervillain with all the crazy schemes, you know.
So ridiculous.
Spies.
And I love that we are now we're now explicit about the absurdness of the schemes, where there was a point we didn't talk about, but there's a point where Robin was talking about this scheme and he says something about how, of course it's going to be over the top because that's what his plans are, all over the top. Anyway, we have O'LiamRoe has gone. He's going to go to Gaultier and Madame
Gautier.
Gautier and Madame de
Dame de Dutance.
to find the henchman. But before that, we get this other look at the French court where Obni is sleeping calmly, and all of the court are automata. Automata? Yeah. Robots. And but the queen has been tossing and turning, the Dowager Queen has been tossing and turning all night, probably because she feels guilty. And Margaret Erskine is wide awake. And the implication is that they are not automata. Like they are thinking, feeling, breathing people. And
and it's like what you were saying earlier about the contrast between the scenes of the ceremonial crap and then like the reality happening in the Lymond saving the queen is all these people are here to just play out this ritual that doesn't, like, they're just following like mechanical steps. But with the people who know the danger Mary Queen of Scots is in and who care about her, they're wide awake because she could get killed at any moment. They know that this is serious business. It's not just this ambassage playing out this, ambassadorial political thing. This is like the real terror of the little girl getting murdered.
Yeah. So Lymond has this interaction with his guards where he expresses some doubt that he's going to get out of there. So it's the whole, like, maybe they're talking about why would a woman leave her lover, and they give some reasons. And Francis is like, it's beginning to sound unlikely to me. So like he's beginning to think like, oh, I don't think this is gonna work. Like,
I love this little scene. It's such a good way of giving us like insight into his thoughts, where he's doing two things at once. He's making friends with his guards because, as we've seen with Lymond, how he was with Christian and Sim, he's very, very smart and he's always manipulating people for a good reason, but he's always finding his ways. So he's immediately, of course, making friends with his guards because he knows it may come in handy for him later. And he already knows that the taller one is more amenable than the shorter one. And then he's asking this question about why a mistress might part from her lover, and so we know he's wondering, is Una going to come through? And I love, there's just this hilarious line where one of them says, she leaves him for a better lover, and the answer is no, said Lymond gravely. That has been tried.
Yeah. No, that didn't work. We tried that. He's not humble about his sexual prowess.
Well, he knows he's better than O'Connor.
Yeah, it's all right.
But no, it is a weird, like, he's not humble about it, but he also has this, it's just another tool in his toolbox.
Yeah, I mean, he's not humble about his skills, but I don't necessarily think that he thinks that's a good thing. Like, he's skilled in bed for reasons that he's not proud of, which is sad.
They also have an exchange that's actually about O'LiamRoe, which is about, basically Lymond says that if O'LiamRoe was the one that got her away from Cormac, the woman would never even think of him. His office is purely to sunder. Neither he nor any man has power to do more than that. Which is actually the opposite of her saying that she is going to think of O'LiamRoe, right?
But then he says his reward is that she will not be with him. That, like, the reward of getting her away from this guy is not to have her, which is I think Lymond saying, like, she's more trouble than she's worth. And that, like, not having her is better than having her. But kind of sad.
I agree. It's sad. Also, just another the line he says about her: "She's beautiful as the tides of the sea, warm, silken, and fathomless, and familiar with mysteries." So again, the sea. She's always the sea, and she's always like familiar with mysteries, creatures. Like she's like this otherworldly being, which is sort of objectifying to her. Like she's a person, damn it. But it is very metaphorically resonant with how she is.
And it's also dangerous, like dark and dangerous. Like when you think, I mean, the sea is super, I mean, I think it's super scary. I have a phobia of water that I can't see through. But like, you never know what's lurking in the depths of the ocean. And most of the stories of like mermaids and silkies and like kelpies and all of that are scary. Like they're going to take you and they're going to drag you into the ocean and drown you. And so, yeah, all of those images of her are not warm and pleasant. So, yeah. Okay, so then O'LiamRoe goes to Gautier, and the fortune teller, and they find out where. Basically, I think the result here is that he's sent on this chase. Basically, so he goes to their town to talk to them. We find out that the fortune teller could have told him the whole time about this henchman because he's her nephew, but she didn't. And so finally she's like, well, if you kill him, you kill him because he's a fool. Like he's an idiot. And I tried, but no.
And well, not only if you kill him, but she literally gives him permission. You may kill him.
You may kill him. He is like, no, like he's a fool. And
There's some other interesting stuff going on in this.
Yeah, I like how she sort of, the line at the bottom of 456, left him, dotard schoolboy, unleavened bread. Can you believe I speak of Cormac O'Connor? So like she's in double speak here. She's talking about Lymond, of course, but he's assuming that she's talking about Cormac. So
yeah. And this lady knows what's going on.
She knows a lot about what's going on. And whether that harkens back to that talk we had the last time she showed up about her possibly having some supernatural gift, or if she's just really well informed about everything that's happening. She's got a lot invested, I think, that we don't know about. Into
she knows his family really well.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and she's very invested in Lymond. She talks about him here. She says, O'LiamRoe says he has shown me, and her answer is he has shown himself. That is all that matters. So the lesson, we just saw O'LiamRoe go through this great transformation and learning, but to the Dame de Dutons, what O'LiamRoe learned doesn't matter, only what Lymond learned for himself matters. Which will be an interesting question after we finish the book, what has Lymond learned during this experience? We also see her incredible lack of sentimentality as she calls Una a fool, O'LiamRoe a fool, and then says you can kill her nephew. And she specifically says about Una, she has the gift, that black-haired woman, and she gave herself like carrion to feed her own pride. And this is, I don't know what it means by she has the gift. Maybe Una has some psychic power too, or I don't know.
I think she may just be calling out the fact that Una has this sort of beautiful mystique about her, and like she's using it for the wrong reasons.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I love that she's like, the woman is a fool. And he answered, you will never see braver. And she says, and you are a fool. It's like, she's like, you people are idiots.
She's no nonsense. She cuts right to it.
Yeah. Yep. So anything else on that section? So then he goes to find artists, but he's not at his home, and so he kind of convinces the woman that he's with to give him a description, and she does, and so he's left with, well, he's gone to Chateaubriand, and all he has is a description of this guy, and he's kind of back where he started. So then we get a little description of the lake, which looks so nice, and isn't it pleasant? And
Wait, you skipped the part where O'LiamRoe had to beat her.
I know, it's like,
Yeah.
he's, yeah.
So already, like, we have this idea of like stepping into the world and taking action
It's dark.
isn't all, yeah, it's dark. You're going to do difficult
Yeah.
things that compromise yourself.
Yeah. Which clearly, I mean, it's clearly compromising himself, but he's doing it and he's acting, and then he didn't get anything from it. I think that's another interesting thing, is that he got nothing except he got a description of the guy, but he could have got that from his aunt. Like there was no value that this woman gave to him. Yeah. And he kind of tortured her anyway. So, yeah, we see they're trying to protect the queen. The lake is there. Then we have Margaret visits Lymond. So,
Okay, first of all, the hilarious part in this, before we get into the scene itself, is she had come prepared to bribe handsomely for the 10 minutes pleasure she wanted, but had found the tall Gowler surprisingly modest in his needs. His smile had puzzled her too. So he obviously thinks that she's the woman that Lymond was asking about earlier. And he was the amenable one that Lymond had befriended. So he's like,
right.
oh, I'll bring you right in.
Right. Sure, you can see him. Yeah. And I like that. So she watched but could not tell the second he woke, for he looked up lazily. So it's just this, like, she's watching him, but she can't really read him very well, which is interesting.
So wants to. She just wants to know every single thing that's going on with him.
Yep. So I don't know. What did you think about this scene?
She's completely obsessed with him and he's completely over her, or at least he's putting on a very good facade of really not giving a crap. And if there's anything he feels about her, it's just disgust, I think.
Yeah, I think he just regrets the fact that they're connected at all. And, yeah.
I also really enjoy where he says, on which aspect of our ill-advised doings are we about to lecture each other? I have very little to say. As I recall, I exhausted the matter on several other occasions. We were there for those other occasions in Game of Kings in particular, and also in the previous, earlier in this book. And I love that line, one, because it's basically like, I've already told you off. I don't even have enough interest anymore to tell you how much you suck. And also it's a kind of nod to the reader, like, we've had the scene, we've had their confrontation several times already, so we're not going to get the same thing again. And it's a really short scene because we have had it, like, he's torn her to shreds.
Yeah. And
then
it has nothing to say. Like, there's no reason to keep hashing over this, and she just can't let it go. And he's like, whatever, I'm done. And I was done a while ago. You know?
Well, and she just watched his performance where he was so, amazing and beautiful and all, and, was biting her lip. Like, she can't stop thinking about him to such an extent that she's going to go bribe her way into the jail just so she can gloat. But it's like, it's to gloat, but it's also because she wants to see him, because she just can't stop thinking about him. And she starts, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, no, you go.
Well, she starts to, like, she always rips on him for having, like, weird sexual practices or whatever, which is obviously like, dude, you're projecting. You're the one who's creeping on young men. But he is just like, oh, not this again. And he's like, debate, if you must dispute the living issues. And he talks about the political situation. So he's got this big vision and he's got this care about the whole world or the whole continent and how everything comes together. And all she cares about is herself. And he says, I don't want to know how small the mainspring may be.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and all this, it's also just that the mainspring is the smallest thing in the world. It's just a single word I. And so, like, she's saying, the thing that I spin around, like the thing that forces me to go, the thing that forces everyone to go, is selfishness, is I. And he's like, no.
I will bring you a nation of souls that will give you the lie.
Yeah. So, and I love that it's kind of a little idealistic on his part, but I really like that.
Well, that he's the classic disillusioned idealist. the idealist who has been, you know, so damaged that he puts on this facade and even maybe tries to convince himself to be disillusioned and to have a, you know, to give up on that idealism, but underneath that idealism is there completely. And that's what drives him, and that is what makes him so appealing to us. Even when he messes up, even when he does bad things, what's motivating him is that idealism, the care for the child, the care for the greater good, the care for other people, in contrast with people like Margaret, who really are only out for themselves.
Yeah. And that determination that she does not, like, her motivation and what motivates her does not define the world. Like, just because there are people like her in it does not mean that humanity is driven by that. And I like that. Yeah. And then we get this scene with Robin that's so sad.
Oh, before we move on, I just wanted to throw one last thing in, and it's that very last sentence. The one thing I'm able to translate, I like how as she's leaving, he sort of throws that in by singing that song. So it basically translates to never close the doors. So he's kind of calling out to her, like, you're never going to get over me. It's like, it's just so very a Lymond thing to do.
Yeah. Do you think he enjoys her obsession with him at all? Like, or is it just so traumatic that he doesn't get any, like, he just wants it to be non-existent?
I don't think he gets any enjoyment out of it, but like they keep being sort of thrust into each other's path. So, you know, I don't know.
I don't think he enjoys it. I think maybe at this point he's sort of appreciating the fact that it's upsetting her more than it seems to be upsetting him at this point.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I think one's still invested in this. I've been over this for a long time. It's like, move on.
Yeah. I think he probably doesn't spend time thinking about her. The damage is more like his inability to trust.
Yeah.
It's not fixated on her specifically,
right,
the way she's fixated on him specifically.
Yeah, she is. Oh, and I'm not sure what to say about this scene with Robin other than it's just so sad. And like, he's trying, like, he's clearly in the moment, in the situation that he's in, he is trying to do everything that he can to please Thady Boy, and he's gonna fail. Like, it's not gonna work. Again, it's not gonna work. And like, yeah, I mean, we don't know it's gonna fail, but it's gonna fail. So
the part that stands out to me is his memory of the rooftop race, and the way he says, as they left, they would walk shoulder to shoulder, sure of each other, as they were on the tower at Saint-Lomère. So that dream of being equals and having, like, he always has these references to friends, these friends who betrayed him. So this idea of being equals and being friends, or as I'm sure in his subconscious, more than friends is what he wishes. But the idea of an equal friend or partner that he could trust and that trusts him. And
yeah,
like the only time in his life, it was the happiest moment of his life. The only time in his life he ever had that equal partnership with someone was that night on Saint-Lomère when he saved Lymond. They were equal partners in that moment.
Yeah. And this bit about, like, the new face of Thady Boy, so Francis Lymond, would note everything, the clean shirt and the hard work. And it's just this idea that, like, he's going to see me. He's going to see everything that I've done. And he's going to treat me, you know, this way, like, I'm going to be approved of and I'm going to be accepted, and we're going to walk away together. And it's just not going to happen. Like, it's not. And like, as for where we are in the book, like, Robin's still standing in the door waiting at the end of this chapter. We haven't gone back to him, but it's not going to happen.
He won't be standing there waiting anymore.
So.
Just a prediction, but
anyway. Okay. So then we get this prep for the ceremony where we're back to the lake, and the French court is going through all of these motions to get like they're trying to get all this stuff to happen, and people are sort of uneasy, and it's not working right, and like there's only 2 tables instead of 3, and there's like it's just like things are going wrong in the ceremony, but they're not that important thing. Like stuff, it's just stuff that's like the carpet had not been spread, and oh my gosh, and yeah, but
all the stuff that doesn't really matter.
Doesn't matter. Like it doesn't really matter. But they're trying to convince Montmorency, who's is he the
constable?
Yeah.
And de Montmorency, the constable of France, and that's whose point of view we're in for these things.
So everyone's trying to convince the constable. So O'LiamRoe, Michelle Harrison, the dowager, like, and Margaret, I'm assuming, is the lady in waiting that is with them. By
the way, speaking of point of view, I love the way that he thinks of O'LiamRoe is the mad Irishman O'LiamRoe who had insulted the king.
Yeah. Which is, I mean,
from de Montmorency's perspective, yeah, that's what O'LiamRoe is.
Yeah. And so a big man he recognized vaguely as some sculptor. He's obviously Michelle. So they're trying to convince him, and they fail because he's like, you still don't have any proof, or you don't have enough proof for him to risk his own position with the king to explicitly accuse D'Aubigny. But if they can find this guy, then that would be great. But they're not allowed to go actively looking for him. Like they can't knock door to door. But they got a bunch of guys. They can keep an eye out, and if they see him, they see him. So, I think he would like it if D'Aubigny was taken down, but he's not going to dip a toe into any water that's risky for him. So
exactly, which again is done at such a precise understanding of how the real world works.
Right, of course.
And that's the whole thing.
I can't be the one leading it, so like you find the proof for it, and let's see what happens.
Yeah.
I don't want to get
whole thing is
my hands.
It's so resonant of the world we live in, where these powerful men get away with all kinds of horrible things because they are powerful men, and powerful men protect other powerful men, or they're protecting themselves above doing the right thing. And all these claims we make about justice is our primary value or whatever. It's like, that's not what really powers what people do for the most part, unless you're Lymond.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that there's a lot of people, like the constable is representative of a lot of people who are sort of like, yeah, I'll do the right thing if it doesn't cost me anything, and it's like, so then the people with integrity are sort of like, how can I present to this person with power a way to do the right thing where they don't have to do any work and it's not going to threaten them in any way. And so it's like all of these machinations to try and like convince the people in power to do the right thing. And it's just exhausting.
Now you're reminding me of work.
Yeah. Sorry.
Anyway.
You are Lymond in this situation, though. You are Lymond and O'LiamRoe as you try to convince the people to do the right thing. Okay, so we're back to the lake and the preparations for the lake and the gardens, and I love this little bit about is this where we get the people who are wanting to, so you've got like all these people who are playing the parts, and there's going to be another big like, we're going to act out this big scene from Greek mythology, which seems to be the thing that they do when they have a celebration. There's this line in the middle of the first paragraph on 264 where it says, some of these, lured by the sun and an authorized negligence of dress, were already there spread on the dry grass. So it's like people came to hang out because they didn't have to, like, they could sort of be relatively undressed in public. Yeah. And it was authorized, so let's go hang out.
Well, and see other people in relatively, lack of dress.
Yeah. Really, it was a pretty strong lack of dress, like, because it's
pretty risque.
Yeah, pretty risque. Like, even like, because it talks later about Diane like hooking her skirts up pretty high. It's like
Mid-thigh. How scandalous.
super. I mean, that was scandalous 50 years ago. Like, can you imagine?
Yep. Well, I mean, if you're going to be a nymph needs to be able to run around in her nymph dress. I don't know, her miniskirt. I also enjoy Abernathy's comment on the whole thing, where he's like, "There's a kind of sameness. Only this time we're untying our very own purse, so we're weaving skimped as to hay." So like this, we saw the entry to ruin earlier. So there's all these super expensive, elaborate welcomes to the king, but this one the king's paying for, so it's not as elaborate.
Right. And which is another commentary. I think we've gotten these little like tidbits throughout the story that the King of France is hurting for money, and he's kind of hurting for money because his own fault, but there's not a lot of cash floating around at this point. So,
well, and again, you can see why people would resent the Scottish, who are taking a lot of money from France.
Yeah. Right. Okay, so then we get this lovely scene where Abernathy and Tosh figure out Dooley. And they figure out what Dooley's done. And as soon as Abernathy figures it out, he's like, boom! And he grabs onto him and like marches him out. Which, great. Yeah. So, I mean, Dooley's complaining about the French and the Scottish and the English and all that. And then it just says, it was Abernathy used to reading the speechless. So I love that it's his ability with animals and like his ability to really get a hint on what entities that can't speak are thinking and feeling. Who stood as if graven, receiving the first signals of danger, then like a snake striking, flicked into the grass and came up with Peter Dooley's shoulder pinched flat in one hand. Like, so then, even then, it's like, would you say, said Abernathy kindly, that he was waiting for something? And he knows. So they carried him silently into the pavilion.
Peter Dooley.
That's why when you were saying earlier, I think he's a good guy, I was like, I don't know, D.
Yeah.
But it's
waiting for him to do something,
yeah.
You know, like there was this
character.
No, sorry.
Well, she plays it very close to the vest. She doesn't reveal anything really about what he's really like underneath. She gives a little tiny hint, but like
get no hint. And it's just like, but they kept dragging this character along through the whole book, and I'm like, at some point he's got to do something. So it was nice to see him do something, even though he was he was not great. So then we get more about this ceremony, blah blah blah. Do we care? I don't really. No, we don't care.
Sorry to those of you who do.
We break Lymond out of prison, basically. I mean, we unlawfully release him, and it's like Robin Stewart sent word. Dooley held it back. It's only reached us this minute. The attempt is now on the lake, and we're off. So it's like, okay, yeah.
So there's the very notable response that Lymond has about Robin in that section. That you mentioned it earlier. Lymond is so callous about Robin. Hope Stewart, he'll bustle in with a knife and a bloody lecture, both wide of the mark when it's all over, and just like dismisses him from his mind.
Yeah, and it's O'LiamRoe who's like, and listen, Stewart is wanting you. He was after you to come for him this morning at 9 to keep the blame off him for all of this. There's a message, and it's like O'LiamRoe is kind of like, hey, what are you gonna do about this guy? And Lymond's just like, ugh, whatever.
I mean, there are more pressing matters. Unfortunately, it's the life of the Queen or whatever Stewart's got to say at this moment.
Right. But I really hope
so dismissive.
I hope that if we're right and Robin Stewart comes to a bad end, which I think is going to happen, that O'LiamRoe kind of dresses down Lymond at some point. Like, I hope at some point, because he's been the one who at multiple points has been kind of like, hey, what are you going to do about this guy? And Lymond has been so dismissive. And we earlier talked about like Lymond has a gift of teaching, and it's like he's failed his duty, he's failed his gift of teaching with this guy. And I hope at some point that somebody calls him on it, and I would like it to be O'LiamRoe. I would like him to say, you failed and you should have done better. Yeah. And I would like someone to do that. Like, I want Lymond to come face to face with the fact that it didn't have to be this way. And for all of Robin's really stupid decisions and the fact that he does deserve his fate, like he's not a good man. Lymond made choices where this could have turned out differently. And yeah, so anyway. But we get this really great adventure scene where we're gonna save the queen.
Yay.
I don't know what to say about it though. Like, it's really fun.
Mm-hmm. I have a couple comments. One is how quick Lymond is, which is just fun. You know, he's a great hero to read about because he's so sharp. And like, you know, O'LiamRoe makes a comment about no one has been out to the boats, and then Lymond's like, then it's going to be a fire arrow, said Lymond, without apparently taking any thought at all. He's already thought through all the scenarios in his head. He's you know, on point. And then I also like how in the heat of the moment, even Michelle Harrison calls him Thady.
Right. Yeah.
And then notable, Lymond does this whole scene shirtless, which I sort of missed the first time I read it, but he pulls off his shirt, and his scarred brown back makes his hair look less yellow than silver.
Right. Which is an interesting contrast to earlier, like when he first showed up as Thady Boy, and like he didn't want anyone to see his back and his like, and I kind of assumed that part of that was perhaps his disguise, like that maybe people knew this about him, that his back is scarred. But I also thought it was a vulnerable thing about just not wanting to reveal his scars to people. But in this moment of like, okay, we're gonna have to jump in the lake to the stuff.
Yeah,
whatever.
You don't want to swim with a big heavy shirt on.
Right, which is true, you don't. And so he just whips it off and goes.
Yeah. But also in the scene in the beginning, he was actually injured, and he definitely doesn't want people looking at his injuries. Here, he's not injured; he's just scarred.
Yeah. So we have we just have this back and forth between the ceremony and going out, like swimming, cutting the boats free, and swimming out with Huey and dragging the boats apart. And Lymond does this wonderful rowing bit where we see his like professional rowing. And there's lots of other moments we can mention in a second, but also it's this back and forth with the ceremony and just this like super boring, everybody hates what they're doing ceremony, and this action scene, which I liked.
And it's so hot.
So hot.
It's very hot in that ceremony.
A lot.
And everybody's hungry, so they want to get through the ceremony so they can get to the meal.
Want to get it over with. Yeah.
There's a good little bit there from the constable's point of view about the thing with the boar. The play acting over the boar had been typically, a disclaimer of her interest at the time and an excuse for her to be lenient later if she needed one. So I thought that was interesting. Like, it's a way of saying, I don't care about this guy, but also a way to say, well, he killed a boar for me, so let's spare him. And then back to O'LiamRoe, the man of action, that when the cowardy doesn't want to get onto Huey, O'LiamRoe's like, I will ride the elephant.
Yes.
And he can't swim, and he still rides the elephant.
I really loved this like partnership of O'LiamRoe and Huey. It's just like O'LiamRoe can't swim, but Huey doesn't know what he's supposed to be doing. So like
I was so worried for both of them in this moment, just because of all of the horrible things that have happened to animals in this book, and also, don't hurt O'LiamRoe, please.
No, I totally was afraid that O'LiamRoe was going to drown and Huey was going to get like blown up.
I know. I thought he'd be like, well, I have to sacrifice myself to save the little queen, so I'll get on the boat with the gunpowder, and it's not what happened, but that's what I was seeing in my head.
Not good.
There's also a bit back in the boring ceremony where one of the reminders is, there was this: Scotland no longer had such value to France now that the English threat was so weak. If the girl died, the Dauphin would be free to marry elsewhere. So this very cold political kind of thinking of, you know, hey, it would be convenient if she died now. We wouldn't have to spend so much money on Scotland. We could make a different kind of alliance.
Yeah.
And then, so back to the exciting battle. It's just some images I liked with Lymond. The pale gold head of her vassal, slipping fast through the smoke, was haloed suddenly with colored fire. And then later, the little charges within it began to fire and revolve, sparkling within the gray haze, jeweling Lymond's glittering skin as he hopped through. So more of these like glittering, sparkling images with Lymond as her vassal, in contrast to Thady.
The confidence that the little queen has that Francis is going to save her. You know, that this is Margaret Erskine is trying to not show fear, like she's trying to be brave for the children, because there's multiple children on this boat. It's not just Mary. And so Margaret Erskine is trying to not panic and not show fear. And the queen just says, Mr. Crawford will stop it, said the girl, and poked her ruffled red head out from between the lattice of arms. She was afraid, Margaret could sense it, but gallantly she too subscribed to the fiction. What a pity this was to be put to waste. So it's like, they both know that it's unlikely, like they might not make it, but they're both being super brave. And it's like, oh.
Yeah. So then, like back in the ceremony when the explosion goes off, Montmorency's response is telling. He not unpleasurably, like he really doesn't care. He thinks she's died at this point. He really doesn't care. It could open some opportunities for him.
And also the description is like, with a sweet and tintinnabulent crash. A sweet is the word. I can't say tintinnabulent, but a sweet crash. Every window in the room cracked and blew in. And it was just like, whoa. I loved that description as well. So it's a sweet, and like the sound of the glass crashing is sudden. The great boom which had followed the crash split into a chain of detonations, ranting like brother cannon breaching a town. So she does do good descriptions.
And then back, yeah, there's another line I liked, back over to the big action scene where the explosion goes off and Huey like dives, and it says, the rearing waterfall of trumpeting anger, which was Huey. Huey is pissed about this explosion thing.
Yes. As one should be. Yeah.
And then Lymond rescues O'LiamRoe, and then Lymond singing.
Yeah.
Very carefree. And then Lymond in the boat, the unthinking professional pull. Oh yeah, he spent 2 years rowing.
I also loved that there's a bit where so it's talking about Abernathy, and he like swims until he saw the boats veer clear of O'LiamRoe, clear of Huey, moving blah, 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 blah. He dropped the rope, took a deep breath, and dived. Before he dived, like the murdered Hugh of Lincoln, he yelled. O'LiamRoe heard the call, but Huey understood it. And so, like he squealed once good-humoredly because as he knew it, this was moderately good sport, and rolling flat over sank, taking O'LiamRoe with him just as the 4 boats blew up. So it's like Huey saves O'LiamRoe because he understands the warning.
Yep. Which is obviously a trick. Like, Abernathy's taught the elephant to perform tricks, and he shouts the trick that caused him to roll over.
Right. And so then he's mad because the explosion happens, and he's like, "That's not part of the trick." Pissed off. But yeah.
I love her slippery point of view where she'll just like dip into Huey's head for a second and tell us what he's thinking.
I know. Like, we get the perspective of the elephant.
Yeah.
It's so great. Yeah. So, everybody lives, which that's nice.
Well, we're not done with this book yet.
Yeah.
I mean,
the chapter cuts in the middle of the action.
At this point, everybody lives.
Mm-hmm.
And so they all swim to shore. Lymond is singing. I don't know what he's singing.
Un merte je de dirai. I can't. Sorry.
You keep talking. I'll look it up.
Yeah, so, and then O'LiamRoe tells Lymond about Cormac and Una, and this like they're together sort of vibe is happening here, where he's like, we are two pedants, Phelim, guarding the moon from wolves, but better, I suppose, better than electing to be of the moon or of the wolves.
That is an amazing line. What does that mean to you?
So, I mean, it's so interesting. Like, we're two pedants guarding the moon from wolves, which is weird because it's like, obviously the moon doesn't need to be guarded from wolves. Like, they're guarding something that doesn't need to be guarded. But it's better that they're guarding this thing from a threat that isn't real than to be of the threat or of the thing being guarded. So
part of how I take it is the idea of the moon is this something that's like very removed and otherworldly and foreign. And wolves obviously are dangerous. And so if we say the moon is, maybe it's Mary, like she's a child, but she's also a royalty. So she's other than normal humans. And the wolves, of course, are the killers.
Right. So they're not part of the royalty or part of the threat, which is true.
But then also, why does he say pedants? A person who is excessively concerned with minor details and rules or with displaying academic learning is the definition.
It's like a pedant is a bad teacher. So like you often like don't be pedantic would be like someone who's doing bad teaching would be pedantic. So or it's a kind of bad teaching.
Like overly detailed, overly explaining the obvious.
Yeah, obsessed with small details. And rules, obsessed with rules. So I don't know, because neither of them are pedantic. So is he being sarcastic?
But they are. I mean, one thing about them is they're very educated. They think a lot. They read a lot. They know a lot. So like, I mean, it's a little true, but it's not entirely true. I don't know. It's such an interesting line. It's like really resonant. It's like one of those things she writes that sounds like poetry, where it's like the resonance of it is really powerful, even though the literal translation of it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. What are we saying here? I mean, maybe it's like, maybe he's saying like the two of them are caught in this space where they're like they're caught between the royalty, like that, which is far away and above them, the moon, and the conspirators and the people who are desperately trying to seek power, the wolves. And they're caught between them, but they're also like their world is kind of pedantic. Like maybe it's a commentary on all this ceremony that's been happening the whole chapter, which is obsessed with detail and obsessed with useless things. And this world that they're part of is extremely focused on rules of behavior and propriety and ceremonies that don't mean anything and political machinations that on the surface are one thing but are underneath something completely different. And so they're just part of that system, maybe.
I think it's interesting also that this comes right after the exchange where Lymond says, I dreamed that Cormac O'Connor was alone. And O'LiamRoe says he is, and the woman Una O'Dwyer, she is alone also. So I think it also, like, in one way, Cormac is the wolves and Una is the moon. And maybe it's a commentary on it being better for O'LiamRoe to be apart from Una rather than be with her, because she's so foreign and otherworldly and dangerous, like the moon, that if he was to be with her, she could take him in a bad direction.
Yep. Yeah. And then I sort of love that at the end of the chapter, they're like, okay, what now? And it's like, let's go to the menagerie. He's like,
what Michelle has been up to.
And, yep. So Artis is trying to escape from Michelle ever since you began to swallow the King of France's new pond.
It's a great line.
I know.
I have the translation of the poem or the song Lymond was singing
Oh.
in the boat as he's rowing of Liam Rowe.
What is
It's a love poem about carving your initials into tree bark. And the words are, I shall dedicate one myrtle tree on the banks of the Loire, and on the bark I shall write these 4 lines to your glory.
Huh. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So perhaps he's singing to the glory of Liam Rowe and Huey in this moment.
Yeah.
Oh, I like that interpretation.
Okay.
Oh my God, you guys, only 1 chapter left.
Okay, can I just tell you, it was somewhat difficult not to read the last chapter before this section. Like, I was super tempted.
It's a really tough spot to stop.
Yeah, it's like, I can just keep going and find out what happens. But did not. So who knows what's gonna... We've only got 1 more chapter left. I don't know.
Well,
You've already
sorry, I said that we've already talked about what we think is going to happen to Robin Stewart, not Robert. I think Daubny's going to get caught. I think that I don't know if we're going to see Una again. I think she may be done for this book.
I think we will.
I do think we'll see her again, like you said earlier, but I don't know if she'll show back up in this last chapter.
We've only got 1 chapter. I don't think we have room for her to come back. I mean, she's kind of had a nice bookend,
Mm-hmm.
you know, with the "Don't find me, I'm going away." Like, it's kind of a nice bookend for the story. Yeah. So you were saying Robin has got to be dealt with. Daubny's got to be dealt with.
I wonder if historically, when did Mary Queen of Scots marry the Dauphin? Is it coming soon? Is that something we might see in the last chapter, or maybe for a next book? I don't know.
Surely that's gonna. Surely they got to have massive amounts of preparation for that.
Yeah.
Like, the next chapter isn't going to take months, hopefully.
No, but I mean, if Daubny gets caught, I don't think anybody's going to try and assassinate her anymore. I hope. I mean, obviously it never happened, so.
Yeah. Like, the wedding would take a long time to prepare. Talk about ceremony. Holy smoke. That would be crazy. It would be like...
How about Lymond and Liam Rowe and Margaret Erskine? What's going to happen with all these characters?
Oh.
Poor Margaret. I hope Tom comes back. I love that. There was this one line we didn't talk about where she said something about how, like, I wish Tom was here because he can make sense of all this craziness. I like that.
I have a feeling Lymond is going to want to distance himself from the situation. Once the Queen is safe, I don't think he's going to want to work with the Dowager anymore either, especially after she repudiated him and how she's been using him. Like, I can see him being like, I did this for you, I'm done.
Yeah, me too.
Like, I don't know if he'll go back to Scotland or go on some other adventures elsewhere, but I mean, that's getting ahead to the next book. We're just talking about the next chapter, so.
I mean, we talked at the end of the last book about how, and this is getting a little bit into our discussion after next chapter where we talk about, like, where is it going to go next? But we talked a little bit at the end of the last book about how he's kind of got, like, Europe is his oyster.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I really do not want to see him go, like, I don't want to see him go to North America or anything.
I don't think he will.
But there's lots of places. Like, is he going to go to Spain? Is he going to go to, I mean, he could go to North Africa. Is he going to go to, I'd love to see him go to Constantinople. Is he going to go to
Germany?
Yeah, there's the whole, like, Germany, the Rhine, like, that whole section of
Scandinavia.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah.
Are there any, like, themes that you want to see wrapped up in this book with Lymond? We already talked about his treatment of Robin Stewart as one of them. Are there any others?
I still want to see Daubny taken down in some sort of super dramatic fashion. I just think it would be fitting because he's a weirdo, super dramatic assassin. I still want to see the king, like, come to some sort of, like, he's been protecting Daubny this whole time, and there was even a moment in this chapter that we skipped over, but it was like he sent the constable said he was going to go look at what was happening, and he says, no, send John Stewart. And it's like, really? like, this is like, I feel like at this point the king knows that Jon Stewart is doing something. I feel like he's being deliberately obtuse right now.
Or he's just one of those people who like trusts his friends and doesn't use his common sense.
Maybe, which is bad for France.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah.
So I want to see that. I'd like to see Lymond. I'm torn because I know this is book 2 of 6. So I want to see Lymond like integrate these parts of his personality. Like if Vervassel is one side of him that's like super precise and cold and glittering, and Thady Boy is this other side of him that's like super artistic and yet out of control, and he like descends into debauchery and all that. Like I'd like him to integrate these 2 parts of his personality into sort of a whole person who is able to interact with the world in a healthy manner. But we're on book 2 of 6, so I feel like that's probably not going to happen. Certainly not going to happen in the next chapter. I feel like this is a journey that Lymond's on that's long. So, and it's probably going to get worse, like, because that's what happens. Like, so whatever happens to him in the future, it's going to be worse than now.
I just hope he doesn't resort to all the drinking. And
I know.
Like, we've seen that from him. Like, he learned his lesson from that, I hope. And I really don't want him to go back to it.
Yeah, I'd really like to see, like, competent Lymond, like the able to read the room Lymond. I'd also like to see the Lymond that, was the one who made Turkey Matt and all of his men like so fanatically loyal to him, and the Lymond that like brings people along and makes them better people, and able to live more fulfilled lives. And like, I want to see that Lymond. But in the next chapter, Robin has to be resolved. Diabni has to be resolved. Does anything else have to happen?
I just think there's going to be some sort of conclusion to the Dowager Queen and him, and him not necessarily telling her off, but him being like, my job here is done, so goodbye.
Kind of telling her off, like maybe just. I think you're right. I like your idea about like, I've done this for you. Now I'm gonna go off and do something else. Like, I don't see him staying in France, and I don't see him going back to Scotland.
No, I mean, I could see him going back to Scotland, but I can't see him allowing himself to be used by the Dowager Queen any longer.
Yeah, I kind of hope he doesn't go back to Scotland though, because then I feel like if he's in Scotland, it's the complications of like Richard is there, the Dowager Queen is there.
I want to see more Sibylla though.
I know, me too. Yes, I would like to see more Sibylla. I'd like to see the adventures of Sibylla and Lymond. It's just like off somewhere.
She only literally had a page in this book.
I know. I thought it would be kind of fun, like road trip with mom. I don't think that's actually going to happen, but
Probably not.
It would be fun. Yeah.
Well, then we will see each other and our viewers next time for the final chapter of Queen's Play. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye.